Welcome to an intro to serious philosophy. This is, of course, a Halloween special, but don't be fooled by silly appearances because this is going to be one of the most serious philosophy episodes that you'll find anywhere online. If you're a student of philosophy or you're interested in philosophy, this is going to be some of the best advice you can ever get about how to do philosophy, how to get into philosophy. I'm going to give you my lifetime's worth of tips and advice for how to do that. This is supposed to be my top advice for philosophy students or aspiring philosophers. Funny enough, nobody really teaches you how to do philosophy. I'm a philosophy major. I went to university for philosophy. I studied it academically, seriously, you might say, and way beyond. I'll get into that in a minute. But what's funny is that in university, nobody sat down and taught me how to do philosophy. It's amazing. It's amazing how bad it is. So before we get into all that, though, because I have some strong opinions about how to do proper philosophy, because see, philosophy is my life purpose. My whole life has been about one thing, understanding reality. And that's essentially what philosophy is. I started doing philosophy in my mid-teens, all through high school and through university. I spent about over 2 decades doing philosophy. I effectively became a professional philosopher. That's basically what I am. I do this full time. I've turned philosophy into a $1 million career. Not a lot of philosophers can say that. And those few who have been able to do that, usually if they're able to do that, it's because their philosophy is very shallow. What's interesting about my career is that I've been able to find a unique way of doing philosophy outside of the academic setting, which is even deeper than the philosophy you find within academia. And also I've been able to make it popular and successful. So that's pretty rare. And there's a lot of lessons that I have discovered in doing that. I basically taught myself how to do philosophy, even though I went to university for it. What I learned in university was nothing like real philosophy. All the real philosophy that I learned, I had to teach myself through years of trial and error. And so I have a lot of wisdom I can share with you on that, if you're interested. Now, even though I'm just some YouTube blowhard, again, don't let appearances fool you. And one of the top lessons, by the way, of philosophy is that appearances can be very deceiving. Reality is a very deceptive thing. It's full of all sorts of appearances that hide the truth from you. So even though I'm just some YouTube blowhard, you might think, how serious of a philosopher can this guy be? You might wonder, to be giving me this kind of advice. Well, actually, I have probably over 2 PhDs worth of study that I've done just on my own independently. I don't have a PhD. But the thing that you'll learn if you do philosophy the way that I do it, the way that I'm going to teach you how to do it, is that if you do this for a few decades, you're going to have a deeper understanding of philosophy and reality than any university professor at the best of universities. That's a pretty bold claim. But again, appearances can be deceiving, and a PhD is just an appearance. It's just a credential. It doesn't mean that the mind actually comprehends the significance of existence. That's 2 very different things. A PhD is given out to somebody, it's not a guarantor that person who receives it really understands what reality is, what philosophy is, believe it or not. If these claims were not bold enough, here's an even more bold claim, which is that I've used philosophy to reach an absolute understanding of reality. I've used it to reach what I call omniscience. Most philosophers would tell you that this is impossible. Yeah, it's impossible the way that they do philosophy. But there are better and worse ways of doing philosophy, which we're going to get talking about. Here's an even more bold claim, is that I'm one of the only philosophers on this planet who has reached the literal end of philosophy. How is that possible, you might wonder? Am I just being arrogant and boastful? Am I just exaggerating, or is this actually possible? The literal end of philosophy. What is the end of philosophy? See, most philosophers don't even think there is an end to philosophy. They think philosophy is just endless debating and arguing and navel-gazing and speculating. But that's not really what philosophy is about, and we'll get into that in a bit here as well. But to just wrap up this introduction, the point of this episode is that I want to give young aspiring philosophers tips from my journey, tips that will save you decades of wasted effort, advice that will transform your whole life if you follow it and stick with it. And one of the tricky things about philosophy is that it's very easy to get lost in it. It's easy to get lost in the labyrinth of your own mind and to spend decades doing it and not getting anywhere. And that's precisely what I can save you from. Now, my style of philosophy is very grounded, it's very advanced, yet at the same time, it's practical and it's quite unique. I have some very strong views about how to do philosophy, and that is because, in my opinion, philosophy has been badly abused, especially in the West. And mostly what we'll be talking about here is sort of the Western philosophical perspective. Although, of course, I've studied a lot of Eastern philosophy as well, and there's a lot of good stuff to be found there, but we'll get to that in due time. So philosophy in the West has been badly abused, and I see that one of my purposes and functions in life is to show mankind how to do philosophy properly. Now you might say, well, Leo, who are you? Who made you the Pope of philosophy? Who are you to say what's the right way and the wrong way of doing philosophy? Aren't these just your biases? Well, again, maybe that's what's going on here, but maybe there actually are right ways and wrong ways of doing philosophy, and maybe there is an end point to philosophy. Because see, if you think of philosophy as just this endless blowing around in the wind like a leaf, just sort of exploring this topic or that topic, speculating about things in your armchair, if you think that that's all philosophy is, then to you this claim can seem preposterous. Isn't it all just relative? But consider the possibility that actually there is something that we might call absolute truth that you can reach with philosophy. And to reach that absolute truth requires doing philosophy in the proper ways, not just willy-nilly, however you decide. It's not just all subjective and relative, although relativity is an important topic within philosophy, which I've discussed in the past. I have a whole series of episodes on that. So actually, this leads us to a very interesting topic, which is the topic of metaphilosophy. What is metaphilosophy? Well, metaphilosophy is philosophy about how to do good philosophy. Questions such as, are we doing philosophy properly? Are there right and wrong ways of doing philosophy? And if there are, what are they? And how can we know about them? Can we know them for certain? Or are these just subjective and biased and relative? What leads to corruption within philosophy and why? What are the corruptions of philosophy? And if there are right ways of doing philosophy, how can we teach those right ways of doing philosophy to the majority of people? What are the obstacles to doing that? So these sorts of questions would be the topic of metaphilosophy. Now, many of these questions are too advanced to be answering here. Maybe I'll have a whole separate episode just called Metaphilosophy that goes into that, but this just gives you an idea of how deep this can go. Because if you embark on the journey of doing philosophy at all, immediately you start to have meta questions. You can reflect on the process. You can say, wait a minute, am I doing philosophy properly? Wait a minute, is this even going to be worthwhile? Where's this going to get me? Am I doing it the wrong way? Am I being biased? Am I being corrupt? Are the people who are teaching me the wrong ways of doing philosophy? And if they are, then I'm going to waste decades of my life doing philosophy in the wrong ways. And then where's that going to get me? You see? So before you can do philosophy, you got to really answer the questions of metaphilosophy, which is sort of what this intro will be pointing you in direction of. We're going to be talking about sort of the methodology of philosophy, more so than the actual answers. I'm not interested in this episode in giving you answers to what the absolute truth is or what reality is. I have other episodes that cover that topic, first of all. Second of all, that's actually less important because whatever the truth happens to be, I can't tell it to you. You have to go through the process of deriving it for yourself. And so I want to introduce you to the philosophical method, the right way of doing philosophy. And then you generate your own answers so that I'm not brainwashing you with those. So here are the questions that we will answer in this episode. What is philosophy? Why do philosophy? How to know if philosophy is right for you? How to do philosophy? Is there one correct philosophy? Is there an ultimate endpoint to philosophy? And if so, what is it? Which philosophies are worth reading and studying, and which ones are not? What are the traps of contemporary philosophy? What are the common mistakes and corruptions that exist? Should you become a professional philosopher, an academic, or a professor? Should you turn philosophy into a career? Is philosophy worthwhile? Isn't philosophy just all mental masturbation? Can philosophy actually be useful or practical? What can you expect out of doing philosophy? How to become an excellent philosopher? Proper motivations for serious philosophy, essential skills and practices that every philosopher needs to learn and to master. How to get started with philosophy. Are you too young to start doing philosophy? And what are the downsides of doing philosophy? So all of these we will tackle over the next few hours. So get comfortable, sit back, and let's get started. But before we get into the technical details of doing philosophy and the method and so forth, I want to share with you a little bit of my personal story of how I got interested in philosophy in the first place, because this might be illuminating for you if you're toying around with the idea of getting serious about philosophy as well. For me, it really began when I was young, when I was a kid. Just when I was 8 years old, 10 years old, my earliest memories I remember of philosophy is just like sitting in a hot tub with my dad or with my family. We would sit there in the hot tub late at night looking up at the stars. And, we had nothing to do, so we would just sort of ask interesting questions about life, about reality. We would wonder about the stars. What are the stars? Where'd they come from? How far away are they? How old are they? Those stars, when you're looking up at those stars and you're wondering, it takes thousands and perhaps millions of years for the light from some of those most distant stars to reach your eyes. So really, when you're looking at those are stars that might have long ago gone extinguished, and yet you're still seeing them. And that kind of makes you wonder, oh, wow, that's amazing. And you think about how many stars are there up there. And that makes you go, wow, that's amazing. And where do they all come from? And what are you doing here, sitting here on this rock, orbiting some random sun, which is just one of these out of millions and billions of stars, circling around at some crazy velocity? How is all this possible? Where did the planet come from? Where did humans come from? You look at your own body and you just wonder, I have this incredible body. How does it work? It's made up of cells, and those are made up of DNA and various kinds of molecules. And all of this just makes you wonder. At least it did for me. Now, honestly, most people, especially most kids, don't wonder about these things. They just go play with their friends and so forth. But I was deeply curious about these kinds of questions very early in my childhood and throughout the rest of my life from then on. And this is how philosophy really begins, is just by wondering about what it is you're doing here and how things work. So I started thinking about stars, science, technology, cells, DNA, evolution, animals. One of the things that fascinated me is animal consciousness. What are animals conscious of? How come humans treat animals so much worse than they treat other humans? Are animals really as dumb as humans think they are? Or are humans just so arrogant and selfish and biased that we actually discount the intelligence of animals? I started to wonder about that. I also started to wonder like this, if an animal is so dumb as humans think, like an ant or a mouse, what does a mouse or an ant know about reality? Compared to a human, they know nothing. A mouse knows nothing. A mouse probably doesn't even see the stars, doesn't even know that it's on a planet, doesn't even know what the sun is. I mean, it experiences the sun, but doesn't really know what a sun is, doesn't know that it's some nuclear reaction happening millions of miles away. It doesn't know what evolution is. It doesn't know what DNA is or what cells are. It doesn't even know what mathematics is. And then you start to think, well, if a mouse is just that conscious, and then we think maybe a dog is a little bit more conscious, and an ant is even less conscious than a mouse, like what does an ant know? Or what does a worm know? A worm that lives in the earth doesn't even know that there are forests outside, doesn't even know what the sky looks like. It spent its whole life living a mile beneath the earth. Or a fish that's living at the bottom of the ocean, a mile below the ocean. What does that fish know? It doesn't even know that it's on a planet or there's a surface. It doesn't know there's a sky. It doesn't know there's light and that there's night and day because it lives so deep. And then, of course, the next sort of extrapolation beyond that is like, well, humans supposedly know quite a bit more than those creatures, but then why do we assume it stops there? What if there's something beyond what humans understand to the same order of magnitude as that of a eel living a mile beneath the ocean? And that makes you really wonder how much more there is beyond human understanding. After all, if you were alive 2,000 years ago, even humans 2,000 years ago understood so little about nature and reality. They had so many silly ideas, religious superstitions, and weird theories that we now know were completely ridiculous and wrong. But at the time, they thought they understood the cosmos. Makes you really wonder. What if we're in that same situation right now in the 21st century? See, so I started wondering about all this, and this got me thinking about some very deep existential topics. And I specifically remember one time my family and I, we were doing a road trip somewhere. Sometimes we would go skiing. We'd have to do like a long 6-hour road trip to Lake Tahoe or somewhere. And on that road trip, we would be driving in the middle of the night to our destination. There was nothing to do. Back then, there was no podcast to listen to or anything like that. So we would just have conversations. And we would have conversations. I remember my dad would bring up like some topic to talk about, or my mom would, and it would be some kind of existential philosophical topic. And we would sit there for hours and just debate it in the car. Sometimes we would get into heated arguments. Other times it would just be a nice dialogue of different perspectives. And we would basically be doing armchair speculation. We would be speculating about this thing or about animals or about, like, I remember one time we were in the car and we were kind of arguing about, could there be animals that are more conscious than humans, more intelligent than humans? And I would say something like, well, what about the elephant? Doesn't the elephant have a bigger brain than a human? How do we know the elephant doesn't know more than a human if it has a bigger brain? Supposedly consciousness comes from the brain, right? And I remember my dad, he argued that actually the elephant has a smaller brain than the human. And I know that I knew that this couldn't be correct. Like the volume of the brain mass of an elephant has to be larger than that of a human. But my dad actually disputed this. So we would argue about this. So just kind of silly things like this that ultimately led to nowhere. But here's the heart of it. Here's why I'm explaining all this to you. You might say like, so what? What's so important about this? Well, here's the key. What I discovered, and maybe I was just 12 years old at that time when this conversation happened, is I discovered that I got most passionate and most excited about life when I was in these conversations. To me, this was the most interesting aspect of being alive, is being engaged in these conversations. To me, this was more interesting than playing a video game or listening to music or even having sex, is thinking about these questions. Now, at that time, I didn't explicitly understand this, but now in retrospect, I'm just telling you in retrospect, I had to go through a whole process to come to realize like, oh, this is what my life purpose is to be asking these questions and to be pursuing these answers. It took me a long time to figure that out, which is why I'm sharing this with you, because maybe this will help you figure out if philosophy is right for you. Because if you're not interested in these kinds of questions, then you're not interested in philosophy. Then when I got into high school, I would engage in debates really with one of my best friends who was a devoutly religious evangelical Christian. He was from Brazil. They're very religious down there. He was a Catholic or something like that. I don't know. Was he evangelical? I don't remember what he was. Just very devout. He would walk around high school carrying a Bible. That's how religious he was. And I did not go to a religious school. This was just a public school. Nobody else was doing this. But I remember him and we would argue about the existence of God. I didn't believe God existed. He, of course, did. As a Christian, we would argue and debate about all this kinds of stuff. And I noticed that him and his religious friends, he hung out with a circle of religious friends, that the way that they reasoned and argued, when I would ask them sort of probing existential questions about, like questions such as, well, if God exists, who created God? And if you say God created himself, well, then why couldn't the universe have just created itself? If God could have. So questions like this, and they didn't have good answers. And I could see that they were fooling themselves because they had a belief in God, but they didn't really have an understanding of what God is. They didn't have good arguments. It was just pure dogma. So I already saw that that's a problem, because how do I know that what they say is true? Because somebody else might believe in something else. How do I know that's true? How do I know what is true? This question started to rack my mind in high school. So I started really deeply contemplating this question. This got me into what's called epistemology, the theory of knowledge. How do we know anything for certain at all? That's the subfield of philosophy called epistemology. So I spent a lot of time contemplating reality, science, my situation in life, like what am I going to be doing with the rest of my life? I also started thinking about, myself in relation to reality. See, philosophy is not just thinking about reality in some sort of clinical, objective manner. It's also about what's my relationship to reality? What should be my relationship towards animals, towards humans, towards the stars, towards planet Earth? I started thinking about religion. I was also studying history at this point, and European history especially, and I was just looking at all the religious wars that happened in Europe. How many people were killed? Christians killing Christians, Christians killing Muslims, Christians killing Jews. Over what? Over just ideas and beliefs? So I started thinking and contemplating about all this. And then I got my first philosophy book, which was not actually a specific philosopher. It was an encyclopedia of philosophy, which listed all the different philosophical schools and a few pages about each one. So I flipped through and read through different ones, and I found it fascinating just to think about the different philosophies that exist. What are all the different philosophies out there? Materialism, idealism, solipsism, existentialism, nihilism, and so on. And then I started thinking about, well, they all disagree with each other, so how do I know which one is true? And of course, the encyclopedia doesn't tell you which one is true. It just gives them all to you, and then it's your job to figure it out. And I wasn't just interested in studying philosophy for the sake of philosophy. I was interested in what's the truth. I don't want to just memorize 20 different philosophical schools and be able to recite them to somebody as some purely academic pursuit. I care about what's actually true. What's the nature of reality? I also went online. This was the early internet days. There wasn't that much internet content back then, but there was some. And I started to look at various philosophical schools online, like reading basically Wikipedia entries about them, brushing up on them. There were some very exotic and interesting ones. And it was confusing, and I didn't know how to differentiate between the good ones and the bad ones. I also started reading Western philosophers like David Hume. He was one of the first philosophers I read. I also was studying science at the time because I figured, science gives me a good understanding of what reality is. So I was very curious about physics and chemistry and biology, for example, and evolution. And in fact, I started reading Charles Darwin's book on the origin of species just on my own because I was so interested about evolution, understanding how it worked. So I did that. And then one day I told my dad that I decided I want to become a professional philosopher. And he told me, oh, Leo, philosophy, it's all just mental masturbation. You're going to regret it. You got to do something more practical. So I took that into consideration, and I figured he has a good point there. But I still kept doing philosophy. In fact, I started doing very deep late-night contemplation sessions. I would just sit in my room at 2 a.m. with a piece of paper, just trying to figure out what is reality and how do I figure out what reality is? What are the different ways I can go about it? And I had some early breakthroughs even then. This was before I even read a bunch of different philosophy. At that point, I was literally just doing it on my own. And even then, one of my earliest, deepest breakthroughs was the realization that all of reality is groundless and that all belief systems are groundless, including science itself. I was able to see that just by sitting with a piece of paper and thinking through, how does science work? How does science come to its conclusions? How does religion work? How does religion come to its conclusions? And I very quickly saw that these are belief systems and ideologies and methodologies that are ultimately grounded in nothing. They're circularly justified or not justified at all. This was an important breakthrough in epistemology for me. At this point, I was also experimenting with radical skepticism. Of all the different philosophical schools that I read about, I resonated the most with skepticism, also called Pyrrhonism. In ancient Greece, there was a school of philosophers called the Pyrrhonians, who were the radical skeptics. And they basically doubted that it's possible to know anything about reality. And that's sort of the conclusion that I came to, is that I don't know how to know. But this is tricky because if you say that I know it's impossible to know anything about reality, that's true for certain. If you say that, that's actually a knowledge claim. That means you know that. But I was so skeptical that I wasn't even willing to say that I knew that, because I didn't even know that. I didn't even know whether I could know or I couldn't know. And so that just left me in this kind of empty, null state. At that point, I had dreams of writing a book, a world-transforming book that would destroy every philosophical system, because every philosophical system that I read, I could see it had its assumptions. And all those assumptions, if you question them deeply enough, eventually this philosophical system would collapse. You would deconstruct it. And so I wanted to create my own philosophy, which was the philosophy of deconstruction. And then, but then see, I realized, wait a minute, but if I create my own philosophy, which is supposed to deconstruct all other philosophies, then what about my own philosophy? That one too has assumptions to it, and that too needs to be deconstructed. And so what happens if I deconstruct my own deconstructing philosophy? Where do I end up? I can't even write a book at that point. And so I tried writing philosophy at that point. This was maybe when I was 18 years old. But everything I I hated, because every time I wrote down some positive, constructive statement, I already realized that it's limited. It comes from various assumptions, and that I can't know for sure that it's true. And so I struggled with this. Then I went to university, started studying philosophy in university, and I started researching the possibility of what it would take to become a professional philosopher as a university professor. I actually bought a book that explained, how do you become a university PhD. I kind of looked through the whole process, and then I realized very quickly that the whole PhD process is a pyramid scheme, especially when it comes to fields such as philosophy, because you have to go through this whole, 8 or 10 years of getting your PhD, and then you have to go back into the system, and there has to be a spot for you in the system. But there's so few spots in the system for philosophy PhDs that there's way too many people clamoring for every position and not enough positions for everybody, because it is a pyramid scheme essentially, because what you're doing is you're becoming a philosophy professor who then needs a bunch of students underneath you to fuel your career and your position. So for every one philosophy professor, there has to be hundreds of philosophy students. And I was really disappointed by this. I saw how corrupt the whole university system is, and I realized that I can't pursue the truth within this kind of system, because this system is not prioritizing truth-seeking or genuine philosophy. What it's prioritizing is the academic bureaucracy. And then you have to play by the games of this academic bureaucracy in order to have a position. And as soon as you stop playing by their rules and doing philosophy the way that they like to do philosophy, they're going to kick you out, and you're not going to get the position. The people who get the position, because there's so few positions and so many people, are the people who basically become lapdogs of the university system. And that's not what I was interested in. So then at around age 20 or 21, I decided that I would reject the university and academic system on purpose, because if I didn't, then that would be selling my soul to the devil, and it would corrupt my whole philosophy, and that would be perverse. So I would rather do philosophy on my own or not do philosophy at all than become a whore to the university system. And so that's what I did. So I dropped the idea of becoming a philosopher, and I switched my focus to video game design, which is something I was always interested in as well as a kid. I focused on that for the next few years. I became a professional video game designer. And during that time, I stopped doing philosophy. And then from game design, I started my own business, online business, because even within game design, I realized that as a game designer working for a large AAA studio, I would also be whoring myself out to that studio system, which I also didn't like. I had too much integrity to confine myself to any kind of system. What I really wanted is I wanted to pursue my own creative interests completely autonomously, without any external forces influencing me or corrupting my work, without any kind of financial obligations and so forth, without some boss telling me what I can and can't do. So even though I didn't want to, I forced myself to start my own business. I wasn't really interested in business, other than that I was interested in having complete financial independence so that I could have the creative freedom that I needed to do the work that I knew I needed to do. So I spent a few years building that business and became financially independent and got my autonomy and creative freedom. And at that point, I could do anything I wanted to. And that's when I got into self-education, reading a lot of nonfiction books, science books, and personal development. I got into personal development around this time. And then as I got into that, I also needed to work on my dating life, because I had been neglecting that for all these years because I was so focused on figuring out the nature of reality that I didn't even consider having a relationship with a girl until I was over 25 years old, simply because I was so focused on figuring out what the fuck is reality and what is my role within reality. That's how focused I was. It's not that I wasn't interested in sex. It's just that I was way more interested in philosophy than I was in sex. So I put that on the back burner. But then I turned 25, 26, and I decided that I got to take care of this as well. This thing that I've been procrastinating on. So I got into pickup, started learning theory about attraction, how to get better with girls, all that kind of stuff. That took me down a certain rabbit hole. I started listening to this guy named Owen Cook from RSD. And what's interesting about Owen Cook is that he's a very philosophical guy. In addition to just teaching you pickup skills, he talked a lot about philosophical, deep, profound concepts. And for me, this re-sparked my passion for philosophy. I immediately saw the value in having a a sort of a database of all these interesting philosophical concepts, because they could also be very practical. And that's actually when I first got my idea for what Actualized.org would be, is this catalog of philosophical concepts that would be both profound and also practical at the same time. Then I was stumbling around on the RSD forum, just reading pickup advice. This was back in 2012 or so. And then I saw an off-topic section of the forum where people were just talking about random non-pickup stuff. And there was a thread. And the thread said something like, "This is the most dangerous book you'll ever read in your life." And as soon as I read that thread title, I didn't even click on the thread yet. I immediately knew I had to read this book. I mean, how could you not read that book? The most dangerous book you could read in your life. So I clicked on the thread, found out what the book was, bought it on Amazon. It arrived, I started reading it. The book was titled Enlightenment, the Damnedest Thing by Jed McKenna. It's a very radical book. I read that book. After I finished reading that book, it made me depressed for about a week. Because kind of deconstructs all your illusions about reality and life. But anyways, in that book, he talks about this notion of enlightenment. That's when I really first learned about enlightenment and what it is and how serious it is. And at that point, as soon as I learned about enlightenment, I understood immediately that this is the most important thing in the world, is enlightenment. I didn't even know at that time exactly what enlightenment was. I just knew it was the most important thing in the world. I also knew that somehow it connected to the deep contemplations that I was doing when I was younger in high school, sitting alone at night, contemplating the nature of epistemology and knowledge and how do I know anything at all, and the sort of groundlessness of various kinds of belief systems. I knew somehow it connected to that, but I wasn't sure how. It was just an intuition. So I started following up on that. Then I became a life coach, did that for a bit. Then I started experimenting with meditation, did that for a bit. Then I launched Actualized.org. And then I got seriously involved in that. And I got very serious about personal development topics, which I was also researching at the same time. I was researching both philosophy and personal development, and also a lot of psychology. And I saw a lot of connections between all these topics. Then I got very serious about meditation and non-duality retreats and self-inquiry. So I started doing a lot of that. Then during a 10-day Vipassana meditation retreat, I had my first enlightenment experience, sober. That was so amazing that showed me that there's a whole new dimension to reality that most people don't know that exist, that I didn't know existed. Then I got into psychedelics, and that opened up a whole new dimension to reality that nobody knew existed. And so I dived very deep into psychedelics, and I did other things that I won't go into here because we're running short on time. But in a nutshell, essentially, what happened is that I did so much philosophy, so much psychedelics, so much self-inquiry, so much meditation, so much deconstruction, and I interconnected all these concepts in my mind so deeply that at some point, I reached omniscience. By which I mean, I reached a complete and total and absolute understanding of the nature of existence. As incredible and impossible as that sounds, I did achieve that. And when you achieve that, only then do you understand what all of philosophy is really about and where it really leads to. And also you understand why all the ways that philosophy has been done in the West, by all the famous philosophers, and all the ways it's done in universities, and in academia, and even within science and so forth, that all of that is deeply, deeply flawed. And that using those methods, you will never reach omniscience, which is the true aim of philosophy. So that's my journey. That was my process. The reason I share it with you is so that you can learn some lessons for yourself. If you're an aspiring philosopher, you can see, does this resonate with you? Now let's get into some of the meat here. So ultimately, why do philosophy? Because you are insatiably curious, because you cannot live without answers. It's really that simple. In the end, philosophy is simply the pursuit and love of pure understanding for its own sake. Either you love understanding for its own sake or you don't. If you don't, you have no business being a philosopher. If you do, then this is for you. Personally, for me, there is nothing more meaningful in my life than philosophy. I do philosophy because I cannot stop doing philosophy. Not questioning reality is not even an option for me. If I stopped questioning reality, I'd just rather be dead. To me, life would be meaningless in the worst possible way. To me, the whole meaning of life is that it has such profound depth, and you can question it and question it and question it and get meaningful answers and have genuine insights and learn about the magical ways in which reality works. And you can see patterns, and you can see patterns in the functioning of your own mind and humans and nature and animals. And this really is the root of science. Philosophy is more fundamental than science. Science is like a narrow sliver of what philosophy is about. Because science is like one narrow methodology, whereas philosophy is a more broad inquiry into the nature of everything. Because maybe science is not broad enough to encompass all of reality. Maybe it's too limited. See, and actually, historically, science just was an offshoot of philosophy. Science used to be called natural philosophy. Before there was science, there was philosophy. Because science is actually a sub-philosophy. Someone had to invent the scientific method. Who was that? A philosopher. Philosophers invented science. How did they do that? By asking questions, by being insatiably curious. People wanted to know stuff like, why do rocks fall down and they don't fall up? Why are there rainbows? What is lightning? Why are there earthquakes? Why are there tsunamis? Why are there famines and plagues? Why do humans live for 80 to 100 years but not any longer? Basic questions like this. From this comes all of knowledge. You see, if you value knowledge at all, you must value philosophy, because philosophy is the root and source of all knowledge. If you think back to the first human who could ask questions and think in a sort of a rational way, you might say, maybe 500,000 years ago or however long it was, at some point there was the first human on this planet who asked himself the question, wait a minute, what's going on here? Where did I come from? Who am I? What is all this? How does it all work? And why does it work this way and not that way? Think about how profound this is. Like, let's even broaden this out beyond just this planet. In our universe, where we have billions and trillions of galaxies and stars, which have billions and trillions of planets, probably by just basic logic, there are millions of civilizations and sentient beings around the whole universe, probably many of them older than humanity. But there had to be, in the history of our universe, there had to be the first creature who could think and ask itself the question, how did I come to exist? Like, I'm alive, here I am, I'm conscious of myself. Where did I come from? Where did all this come from? Where did the universe come from? Imagine being that first creature. Think about how mysterious this whole thing was for you. Because see, nowadays the problem is that you're born and you're just fed with all these ideas immediately. You're immediately brainwashed with all the answers of where you came from. So it's no longer as mysterious as it used to be, which is actually a shame because all the stuff you're programmed with, most of it is wrong. So imagine the mystery of being the first one to recognize your own existence and to wonder where you came from and what reality is and how it works. And notice, in that position, you're in a position of total ignorance. You don't know anything. You don't have the scientific method. You don't even have logic and reason yet because you don't even know. You're in such a position of ignorance, you don't know whether science exists or is valid or not. You don't know whether logic will get you to the truth or to the answers. You don't know these things. Maybe reading tea leaves will get you to the answers. You don't know. Maybe doing a rain dance will get you the answers. You don't know at that point. You see how mysterious it is? And you have none of the answers. So imagine not knowing that you're even on a planet. Because see, today you know you're on a planet, but our ancestors didn't know that. And today you know where the planet came from because science tells you that it's stardust that congealed billions of years ago. But ancient humans didn't know that. They didn't know about stardust. They didn't know about gravity collapsing dust together into a ball. They didn't know these kinds of, these ideas were not, so like it's a complete mystery. And when it rains, you don't know what rain is. And when you see a rainbow, you don't know what a rainbow is. And when you see a rhinoceros, you don't know what the fuck a rhinoceros is. You don't know if it's friendly or if it's dangerous. And when you see a mushroom growing out of the earth, you don't know what that thing is. And so naturally you start to question and you start to wonder. But these days, science has filled many of these gaps for us to the point where most people don't even bother wondering anymore because they just accept the ready-made answers of science or of religion or whatever other cultural conditioning you get. You just accept those answers and then you cease wondering. So to be really philosophical, you have to wonder about the most fundamental questions and things, even those things that everybody else around you takes for granted as already understood and known. The stuff that science tells you is already known. You have to ask yourself, but what is that anyways? Because science can convince you that it knows what a rock is. Science can convince you that it knows what the sun is. And science can convince you that it knows what light is and what the color red is and what a rhinoceros is. And you have to challenge science back and say, wait a minute, but what are those things anyways? Beyond all your, shallow explanations. So philosophy is about going deep. And that to me is the most meaningful thing about life. That's what I love the most about life is that it has this depth to it. But the sad thing is the majority of mankind are completely missing out on all this depth. They just go about life pursuing pleasure, sex, fame, success, money, a car, a house, a family, some children. That's all they care about. And they never really deeply question life. To me, this is a preposterous way to live. I don't know how anybody can live this way, but actually the majority of people live this way. If you can't stomach living that way, then maybe that means you're a philosopher. Philosophy really has two functions. Function number one is your own personal development, understanding, and awakening. Just for its own sake, just so that you understand. notice that there can be a pleasure that you derive just from understanding something. Like, think of a situation where you didn't understand the situation and you were confused by it, and then you, through experience and questioning, eventually you understood it. You came to understand it. Like, maybe at first you didn't understand how your computer worked, and then you figured out how to use computers and how they worked. And there was a joy that came from understanding how to use a computer, not because the computer could be used to get sex, or because the computer could be used to make money or to print documents for your boss, but simply because there is a joy in understanding how a computer works for its own sake. Try to connect with that joy. So that's function number one. And function number two is generating useful insights for mankind. You can use philosophy, for example, to create a better society by asking the question, what is society and how do we make a better one? What are the ways in which society is bad? What are the things that corrupt society? And how do we change those? Or, for example, you can use philosophy to do better science. You can ask the question, what is science? How do we improve science? What are the limitations of science? What are the obstacles and corruptions that prevent us from improving science? You can also use philosophy to reduce suffering for yourself and for others, which can be useful. You can use, for example, philosophy to generate money. You can ask the question such as, what is success? What makes people successful? And then you would have a philosophy of success. You could outline principles. You could find principles that successful people follow to become successful and make lots of money. And then you can also find all the things, like all the traps and mistakes that normal people make that keep them poor. The heart of philosophy, what's so beautiful about it is that it's so simple. The heart of philosophy is just questioning. Questioning. Questioning is actually a thing that humans take for granted. Because if you think about it, what is a question? And how is it that questions even work? If you start thinking about this deeply and you do a sort of an inquiry into the nature of questioning, at some point, it's going to stun you and awe you, the mystery of questioning. It's amazing that you can ask questions of reality and you can get meaningful answers. Of course, you can also get bad answers. You can get a bunch of bullshit and speculation and ideology and dogma. Those would be the bad answers. But also notice it is possible to get genuine, legitimate answers to questions about reality. How is that possible? That's amazing that this is possible. What allows for that? Why is reality structured in such a way? Because you could imagine a reality where you couldn't even ask questions of it. You could imagine being a mouse, and a mouse probably, as far as we know, is not asking deep questions about reality. It probably doesn't even have a questioning function. But you as a human, you have a questioning function. Thanks to language and so forth. And this questioning function is not just a language game. You're not just shuffling symbols and labels and words around when you're asking questions. It is possible to ask very deep questions and to get deep answers. You could, for example, ask the question, if the earth is round, what is it that keeps objects attached to the earth rather than floating away into outer space? And there is a good answer to that. You can find good answers to that. It's not just all mental masturbation, even though, of course, that's possible. You could mentally masturbate about that question, but you could also do some legitimate, serious inquiry into that question. So I want you to appreciate that asking questions is a superpower. And there are many degrees at which you can exercise this power. Most people are grossly underutilizing this power. To them, it hasn't been turned into a superpower. But you could. You could master the art of asking questions. You could start asking very powerful, very deep questions. And you could do it consistently and persistently to the point where you reach very deep answers. You could, but will you? Do you have the wisdom to see the power that this could be for you in your life? Just this one understanding right here could transform your whole life, because it's going to mean the difference between exercising this power and just letting it atrophy. Everybody asks questions at one point in his or her life. That's not the issue. The issue is, are you going to turn this into an art? Or are you just going to do it haphazardly, in a piss-poor way, whenever you're put into a corner? The philosopher is one who undertakes a deliberate cultivation of the art of asking questions, doesn't leave it up to chance, and doesn't just do it for purely pragmatic reasons. See, most people, they only ask questions when it personally serves them. Like they might ask the question, how do I get more sex? But even though, of course, you can ask that question, you can get good answers, and you can actually use that question to get a lot of sex. But you see, this is a trivial utilization of this superpower. Because you could also use that same superpower to ask way, way, way more interesting and important questions than how to get sex. But what's going to motivate you to do that? See, most people live like animals. And if you're an animal, then for you, you're motivated by sex. But what if you want to live in a deeper way, beyond just the way that an animal lives? Well, that would be the path of philosophy. Here's a list of examples of philosophical questions that could get you started in this process. As I'm going to be listing off the next 30 questions here, write down the ones that really strike your curiosity. Some of these you won't care about, you won't find them interesting, but some of them you'll be like, wow, yeah, that's an amazing question. I want to know more about that. Make a note of that. That right there, these are clues to what you should be inquiring into with your life and with your philosophical pursuits. So here we go. Here's the list. Where did reality come from? Why is there something rather than nothing? What is language? What is consciousness? Is a rock conscious? Are plants conscious? Can a machine become conscious? What is the relationship between mind and matter? What is truth? Does ultimate truth even exist? What makes for a good life? Why do people suffer? And how do we reduce suffering? Is there anything valid to religion? Does God exist? What is God? And where did God come from? How do we know we can trust science? What makes science better than religion? What is rationality? Can anything be known for certain? Is philosophy even worth doing? How can I be sure anything exists outside of my own consciousness? What are the best ways to understand nature? What do the results of quantum mechanics mean? What is the color red? How do I know I'm not fooling myself? What is life? How did life originate? Where did the laws of physics come from? Could they have been different? What is time? Is time travel possible? Why does war happen? Why does it keep happening again and again and again and again? Why can't we stop it? What would it be like to communicate with an advanced alien intelligence? How would it be different or more advanced than humans? How do we construct the best society possible? Can all true things be proven? And what is proof anyway? What constitutes proof? Why is the world ordered? What is more certain, perceptions or reason? Which one should we trust more over the other? How do I know which sources of information I can trust? Does philosophy have right and wrong answers? Or is everything just subjective and relative? So this is just a small list of the kind of questions that philosophers ask. Of course, there can be hundreds more questions. But think about this list. It's a pretty broad and diverse list. Ask yourself if any of these have piqued your curiosity. I have an older episode called The 64 Most Fascinating Questions That a Human Can Ask. Go check out that episode if you're interested in more. So how do you know if philosophy is right for you? Here's how. Are you deeply curious about fundamental existential questions? Are you unable to stop wondering and questioning everything? Do you love truth and pure understanding for its own sake? Do you love to question and to contemplate? Do you love to do thought experiments? Does asking existential questions excite you? Do you love conversations about profound existential topics with other humans? If so, then philosophy is right for you. And here's a question, since we're talking about questions, here's a question you should write down and wonder for yourself if you're going to be a philosopher. What is it that you want out of philosophy? Why are you doing philosophy? What are your motivations? It's very important that you're clear about this for yourself and that you contemplate this. And see, the contemplation of these questions, this is not something you just do for a few seconds or for a few minutes. You can contemplate this question such as, what is it you want out of philosophy? You can contemplate that for years, and you will get deeper and deeper insight into the situation. So it's not just about getting some quick answer or asking me for the answer, like, Leo, tell me what I should want out of philosophy. No. Philosophy is about going through the process and deriving your own answers. What are the various fields of philosophy that you might be interested in? There's not that many of them. Here they are, all of them. Basically, there is metaphysics, which deals with what is anything, otherwise known as ontology. It's like the most fundamental things, like what is existence? That's a metaphysical question. Or does God exist and what is God? That's a metaphysical question. Or is reality material or is it mental? These are metaphysical questions. Then there is epistemology. Epistemology is everything about knowledge. Questions about how do we know what we know? How do we know that it's true? How do we know we're not fooling ourselves? How do we answer skeptics, the questions and challenges posed by skeptics, radical skeptics? That's epistemology. Then you have ethics and morality. That's the whole sort of like moral philosophy subfield, which deals with questions of what's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's evil. If God exists, how come God allows for evil? Why do people behave in evil ways? How do we stop people from being evil? How do we make more good people? Questions like this. How do you construct an ethical, moral society? For example, is it moral to indoctrinate your children into your religion or not? Then there's the field of aesthetics, which has to deal with beauty and so forth. Questions around that and art, and what is the beautiful? What is good art? Questions like that. Then there's political philosophy, which deal with how do you construct the best political system and what are the different pros and cons of various kinds of political and economic systems. Democracy versus monarchy versus socialism versus communism versus Marxism versus capitalism, this kind of stuff. Then there's science. There's a field called philosophy of science. In science, there's a lot of fundamental questions about what kind of scientific methods are correct, what kind of scientific paradigms need to be used, scientific models, how to model, all these kinds of technical questions. Then there's the field of logic and mathematics. Different kinds of logics, how do they work, how do they connect with mathematics, what is mathematics? Is mathematics a science? Is it more fundamental than science? Is mathematics absolute truth? What makes mathematics true? How do we know that 1 + 1 = 2? Questions like this. Questions such as, can everything be explained with mathematics? Can everything be explained with logic? Then there's religion, philosophy of religion. All the different religions out there, you can study them all, compare them all. You can ask questions about which one is the right one, what's the best ones, what's the worst ones, how do you compare them to each other? Are they all talking about the same thing? Are they talking about different things? And so on. You can try to reconcile science and religion. Maybe you believe you can, maybe you believe you can't. Do you think science and religion are totally separate domains, or do you think that they connect somehow and they need to be integrated and synthesized? And if so, how do you do that? Then there's philosophy of mind. Questions specifically about consciousness. What is the mind? What is consciousness? How does it arise? What are qualia? Can science study consciousness and the mind, or are these inaccessible to science? What is subjectivity, emotions, colors, perceptions? How do we explain all these things, and how does all this arise from the physical brain, so to speak? How does mind and matter combine, connect? What is their relationship? Is there two things, one thing called mind and one thing called matter? Or are they actually one thing? And if they're one thing, is it all matter or is it all mind? Or maybe there's some other third possibility. Speaking of mind, there's psychology. Now, psychology is usually not considered philosophy, but actually for me, psychology is critical to philosophy. Because as you're doing philosophy, you're coming into contact with your own psychology. If your psychology is screwed up, how are you going to do good philosophy? For example, if you have a mental illness, are you going to be able to do good philosophy if your psychology is wrong? And there's a lot of psychological tricks and biases that the mind has, which you're going to have to take into account when you're doing your philosophy. Then there's the field of sociology, which is usually not considered philosophy, but to me, it's very related because sociology deals with culture and it deals with society. And after all, philosophy and science and religion, these are cultural constructions and artifacts. The only reason you know about religion or science or philosophy is because of culture and because you live in a society. And these cultures and societies, they're different. Philosophy is done differently in the East than in the West. And it's done differently in America than it is in the Middle East. And it's done differently in China because there's different cultural norms. And it's also done differently throughout different eras in time. The ancient Greeks did different philosophy than the medieval period. And then the medieval philosophy was different from Renaissance philosophy. And Renaissance philosophy was different from German philosophy, and then that's different from today's American philosophy. Then there's history. Of course, history is separate from philosophy, but also, how can you do philosophy without history? In fact, most of what philosophy is taught in universities is just history. It's not philosophy. They teach you about various historical figures who did philosophy, but basically they're just teaching you history, the history of philosophy. Then there's the field of spirituality. You might say spirituality is not philosophy, but then again, spirituality is interested in the same questions philosophy is interested in. What is reality? What is consciousness? What is God? What is spirit? What is the soul? Do souls exist? Do spirits exist? Then there's mysticism, also related to that. And then lastly, there's the field of language, the philosophy of language. What is language? How does it work? How does language shape the way that we think about reality? Of course, there are all sorts of more specialized subfields of philosophy, but these are the big ones. So think about which ones of these you're most interested in. All right, so now let's get into sort of like how to actually do philosophy. Philosophy requires serious work. It's not just sitting around in an armchair speculating. So I'd like you to make a distinction here. You can actually create distinctions in your mind. One of the distinctions you can make, which is very powerful, is the distinction between, on the one hand, speculation and beliefs, and on the other hand, genuine observation and insights. These are different things. A lot of people think that speculation and belief and ideology, that this is philosophy. It really isn't. Philosophy is about making genuine observation about reality, or about your own mind, or about your own self, or about people, and having genuine insights. It's not about just sitting back and coming up with ideas randomly and then believing in them. In fact, this here, speculation and belief and dogma, this is the chief obstacle to good philosophy. Because when you have a lot of beliefs and ideas and preconceived notions and dogmas about how reality is, you can't question effectively. You see, to question effectively, you have to have a completely open mind. You have to be unbiased, unprejudiced. Your mind can't be filled with a bunch of cultural programming and fundamentalist religion and stuff like this. You have to seriously be willing to question everything and observe everything. You can't observe a thing honestly when you have preconceived notions that you're projecting upon that thing and you're interpreting it according to your preconceived biases and prejudices and the way that you want things to be. Because see, we're not interested in how we want things to be in philosophy. We're interested in how things are. I might want to live on a flat earth, but that's not the issue. The issue is the earth flat? And how do we know that? And if your mind is close to the idea that the earth is flat, and you just believe the earth is round, how do you know you're not tricking yourself? How do you know that the ideas that you got the earth is round are not just delusions from culture at large? Because look, throughout every era of human history, we know for a fact that there were people who believed all sorts of silly ideas about the earth and about nature, which turned out to be grossly wrong in retrospect. This mask is starting to hurt me. I have to bear the pain here. So yeah, you have to be so open-minded in doing philosophy that you have to be open-minded to the earth being flat. On the other hand, you don't want to just believe that the earth is flat either. Because if you just believe the earth is flat and there's some global conspiracy, well, how do you know that? That's also you just accepting ideas from culture, you see? So it's really, really tricky. And true philosophy only begins when you understand how tricky all these questions are. As it turns out, almost every single fundamental question, like the basic questions that you could ask about nature and life and reality, they seem so simple on the surface. But when you probe into them, you realize how difficult they actually are. Even a basic question like, what is light? That seems like an easy question. What is light? But when you dig into it, it's not easy at all. It's mind-bogglingly complicated and difficult to explain and understand what light is. And pretty soon you realize that this isn't just true of light. There's nothing special about light per se that makes it so complicated. It's true about everything. What is water? What is a human? What is an animal? What is life? What is consciousness? What is a star? What is gravity? What is empty space? Everyday culture makes these things seem simple and resolved, when in fact, none of them are. The only way to become a great philosopher is to spend thousands of hours in deep questioning and contemplation. It's just like any other activity. If you want to become a chess grandmaster, there's no way you can do that without playing thousands of games. And if you want to become a world-class golfer, you have to play thousands of games of golf. And so it is with every activity, and the same thing with philosophy. Only with philosophy, here's the trick, is that a lot of people convince themselves that they are already good philosophers. They begin philosophizing and they just believe whatever their mind comes up with. And they think that they don't need to spend thousands of hours practicing it to be good at it. They just accept their own conclusions immediately. And therefore, they fool themselves into all sorts of ideologies and belief systems. The mind very easily convinces itself that its own conclusions are correct. That doesn't make them correct. And so philosophy is one of the trickiest activities to learn how to do well. Because when you're learning golf or how to play pool or how to play soccer or even how to paint and draw, you have very objective criteria. Like, it's very easy for someone to take a look at your drawing and tell you that it's ugly. Or take a look at your golf swing and just see you miss your golf swings. Ugly golf swings. And you can see it yourself. You can't really fool yourself that you have a great golf swing when you don't. And you can't fool yourself that you're a great artist when you aren't. But it's extremely easy to fool yourself that you're a great philosopher when you aren't. Knowing how to question well is not a skill you're born with. It has to be developed. And knowing how to think is not a trivial skill. Most people are very poor thinkers. They're very biased in their thinking. They fall into various traps of self-deception, like projection, confirmation bias, confabulation, rationalization and justification, reasoning backwards from conclusions, question begging, reasoning in circles, and many, many others. I have a whole series called Self-Deception, where I outline, it's a 3-part series, Self-Deception Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, where I outline dozens of various kinds of self-deception mechanisms that I've discovered. How did I discover those? Did I read those in a book? Did I get them from God? No, I sat down for thousands of hours doing contemplation, just doing philosophy, and observing my own mind fooling itself, having various kinds of biases, observing myself falling prey to projections and other these mechanisms that I've explained, and noticing how tricky my own mind is. To the point where now I'm so aware of my own self-deceptions that I'm pretty good at avoiding them, although I'm still not perfect. The self-deceptions are so sneaky that even after thousands of hours and decades of philosophy, I can still be self-deceived, and I catch myself sometimes. But the difference is that, unlike most people, I am able to catch and correct myself. That doesn't mean I won't make a mistake. I can make mistakes, and I can make mistakes in public. But then, a week later, a month later, a year later, I'll catch myself and correct myself. Whereas most people, when they make self-deception errors, they do it, and then they make that mistake, and they keep doing it and doubling down on it for the rest of their life. See? Philosophy is about improving the quality of your thinking. Most people, you'll notice, are very, very poor thinkers. And even if they're good at thinking about some narrow aspect of life, they're bad about thinking in general. So there's a difference there. There are a lot of, for example, mathematicians who are really good at mathematical thinking, or physicists who are really good at physical type of thinking, and engineers who are good at engineering, and programmers who are good at program thinking, and then other kinds of people who are good at thinking about their little, narrow niche. But then they're really bad when it comes to thinking about outside of their domain of specialization. And philosophy is about knowing how to think in general about anything. Think about how powerful that is as a skill if you develop that. How is philosophical work accomplished? Basically through contemplation and observation. The combination of both these things. You observe, then you contemplate. You contemplate, then you observe, and you keep going back and forth between the two. I have episodes that explain what is contemplation, how to do contemplation. Go check that out. I have episodes that explain observation. I have an episode called Learning Equals Observation. Go check that out to explain that concept. So you closely observe how reality works, or how some part of reality works. And you also observe how your own mind works, and you observe how other minds work. You can literally go outside your house, sit down on the curb, find an ant, and just observe that ant for an hour. When you're observing that ant, you're not judging it, you're not projecting upon it, you're not telling it what to do or anything like that. You're just observing it neutrally, without commentary. You're just observing what it does, noticing its patterns. Maybe you notice that it moves its legs in a certain way. Maybe you notice that it blinks its eyes. Maybe you notice that it wiggles its antenna. Maybe you notice that it grabs a piece of food, and how does it do that, and where is it taking it? This is the beginning of philosophy and the beginning of science. And then you can also contemplate on that. And that's really the work of philosophy. Also, you can do thought experiments. You can do a thought experiment such as, what would happen if I took one ant, put them in a cup, take another ant, put them in a cup, and then combine the two cups together? What are the ants going to do? That's a thought experiment. And then you can actually do it in real life and then observe what happens. And notice that there's a difference between what you think will happen and then what actually happens, what you observe happening. Philosophical work is also accomplished by exploring various perspectives and points of view. This by itself can be very valuable. Because your own mind, your own imagination is so limited that you can't even imagine all the possible perspectives that you can have on a situation. Whereas other minds can have other kinds of perspectives that are different from yours, and it can be valuable because they might have some idea that you won't have in 20 years. So it's valuable just to go through and just to do a cursory review of different perspectives on various kinds of situations. For example, if you're a man, you as a man have a certain perspective about women. And if all you talk to is other men, they're also going to have their male perspectives about women. And that's all going to tend to reinforce itself, creating like an echo chamber. But what about women's perspective of women? You see, that's a different perspective. So if you want to be a good philosopher, you can't just ask men about women. You should also ask women about women. You should also ask children about women. If you could ask animals, you should ask animals about women, or maybe you should ask about women from different cultures. Middle Easterners will have a different perspective on women than Americans, than Scandinavians, than Africans, than Asians. And so as a philosopher, you should be less interested in which perspective is the ultimate right perspective. And you should be less interested in demonizing perspectives. You should be just more interested in exploring perspectives for their own sake, just to see what you can get out of a perspective. And appreciating a perspective for just being its own perspective. It doesn't have to be right or wrong. It's just a perspective. I have an episode called What If Everything is Just Perspective? Go check that out. And then you do philosophical work by asking powerful questions and questioning everything, questioning all assumptions. I have an episode called Assumption is the Mother of All Fuck-Ups, which explains the importance of assumptions. I also have an episode you should check out called The Power of Asking Questions. And I have an episode called Learning Equals Making Distinctions. Distinctions are a crucial distinction that you need to learn how to make and utilize as a philosopher. Because a lot of philosophy is about making distinctions and also, very importantly, learning how to collapse distinctions. Can you see that learning how to think and how to question is very valuable? Just for its own sake. After all, you will be thinking for the rest of your life about every kind of thing. There's no option of going through modern life and not thinking. You're going to be thinking. The only question is it going to be good thinking or is it going to be bad thinking? And for most people, it's bad thinking. So just think about the difference in your life, whether you decide to be a good thinker or not. Because if you don't deliberately take measures to become a good thinker, by default, you're going to be a bad thinker. Nobody's a good thinker by default. Think of what difference that will make for you in your love life, in your business relationships, in your finances, in your investment schemes, in your ability to raise children, to do science. The next point is that philosophy is about self-reflection. What you have to be very careful about as a philosopher is how your own mind gets in its own way as you're doing philosophy. You're not just some neutral, objective observer, the way that scientists imagine when they're doing science. You are a biased creature. You are selfish. You have needs and fears, and you have cultural programming that you've already received for 20 or 30 years before you even began doing philosophy. And all this is going to influence the way you do philosophy. So one of the most important tools that a philosopher has is introspecting and looking inwards. I have an episode called Developing Introspection. That's crucial. Go check that out. So self-reflection is about going meta and thinking about yourself as you're thinking, observing yourself as you're thinking, observing yourself as you're doing philosophy. I also have an episode called What It Means to Go Meta. Go check that out. That's going to be crucial for you because a lot of philosophy is about going meta. In fact, you could almost say that all of philosophy is about going meta. And see, when you ask the question, what is going meta? What does that really mean? See, you're already doing philosophy. You're asking a question, and that's a very good question. And do you know how I generated that episode, What It Means to Go Meta? I sat down for a few weeks, and I contemplated the question, what does it mean to go meta? And I generated a whole list of stuff, and I created a whole episode from that. Very powerful episode. That was an example of me doing philosophy. After all, how do you know that your own thought process is legitimate? What if it isn't? What if you're fooling yourself? So a crucial aspect of philosophy is self-honesty. You have to really be honest with yourself, hold your own feet to the fire, and the avoidance of all possible bias. This is absolutely crucial. Because if you're not honest with yourself about your own biases, and if you're not able to reflect deeply enough to become aware of your own biases, you're just going to be acting out your biases and projecting them out onto the world, creating a sort of echo chamber effect where your own biases are just going to be projected out, and then what you see and observe, and then what you think is just going to be your own biases reflected back at you, you see? And then you're not getting at the truth of the situation, you're just reinforcing your own ideas, which is not serious philosophy. Now let's talk about what philosophy is not. The traps of philosophy. Philosophy is not armchair speculation and just guessing. It's like, well, I think that plants are not conscious. I think that rocks are not conscious. No, that's not philosophy. You're just coming up with ideas. That's not interesting. That's not useful. That doesn't get you any closer to truth. The question is, if you really want to know about plant consciousness, you have to ask yourself, what might plant consciousness look like, and how do I access it? How do I verify that plants are conscious or not conscious? That would be an interesting question. That would require some serious work. You see, the mistake people make is they say, oh, well, Leo, philosophy is just mental masturbation. No, that's just bad philosophy is mental masturbation. Because you see, bad philosophy doesn't require any work. It's like sort of like a lazy man's philosophy. You can just sit around and say, oh, I believe this and I believe that and maybe this and maybe that. And then after all that is said and done, then you just go back to your normal life and nothing changes and you don't lift a finger to do any work. Whereas real philosophy is like, I think the earth is flat. I think the earth might be flat. There's a good chance the earth might be flat. But it doesn't stop there. Then you say, and you know what? I am going to now work to earn the money to buy a ticket on a Russian MiG airplane that's going to take me out to the edge of the atmosphere. It costs about $20,000 for one of these flights on a MiG. You take a Russian MiG all the way to the edge of the atmosphere, and you look down on the earth and you see, is it round or is it flat? So real philosophy means you're going to spend $20,000 to verify that. Or, it doesn't have to be that method, any other method you want. Whatever method you want. But you see, most people are so lazy that they don't want to invest $20,000 doing that. But then that means you're not really interested in the answer. You're not interested in truth. Because if you were interested in truth, as a flat earther, you would want to go out there and actually validate the fact that the earth is flat. You wouldn't just post on Reddit conspiracy theories. You'd actually want to go out there and see it for yourself. And also notice, if you were a true philosopher, and let's say you went, these days you can even buy a ticket to outer space. I believe Jeff Bezos sells them now, or the Richard Branson sells them. Some of these space companies, you can buy a ticket for like $100,000 that will fly you into low Earth. You're not going to be in orbit, but you're going to be like just on the very edge of on the very edge of the Earth, from where you should be able to see the roundness of it or not. If you were serious, a serious philosopher, you would happily pay $100,000 to take that ride and to confirm whether the earth is flat or round, and you would be happy with either conclusion, right? Because as a genuine philosopher, you don't care. You're not attached to the earth being flat or round or square. It could be a fucking pyramid. You don't care. What you care about is the truth. You want to know how it actually is. See? And so if you take a flight up there and you find out that the earth is actually a pentagon, then you'll be happy with that discovery because that's the truth. It's a pentagon. You see? But this is not how most people do philosophy. Most people, when they're doing quote unquote philosophy, they're just trying to reinforce their existing biases. They're not interested in the truth. So all of philosophy hinges on your genuine, deeply honest desire for truth, which means that you're willing to surrender any of your ideas and you're willing to admit that you've been wrong, which most people are not willing to do. So that's the first trap. The next trap is groupthink, ideology, beliefs, and justifying your worldview. We've already talked about this a bit. Most of what people call philosophy is just ideology and groupthink. They're not generating any new insights or making any personal observations about anything. It's just groupthink. There's a difference between reading Karl Marx and his philosophy of Marxism and subscribing to it and calling yourself a Marxist versus sitting down and actually deeply thinking about and generating unique insights about economics. You see, these are two totally different activities. And most people who call themselves socialists, Marxists, communists, and so forth, they've never done any serious economic philosophy. They've just read some stuff and they're subscribing to an ideology or to groupthink that they happen to like because it serves their political agenda. They're not actually generating insights about economics. So please understand this. Oh man, I really regret wearing this mask. It's super uncomfortable after an hour and a half. But I'm committed now. The things I do for you guys. I'm just enduring excruciating pain right now while I talk about philosophy, but we have to go. We don't have time to stop. So, make a distinction between inquiry and rationalization. These are two different things. Inquiry is when you're actually thinking about something, asking questions, coming to grips with truth, deriving answers. Whereas rationalization is when you're just coming up with stories about why you believe what you believe and why it's true and why other things are false. You see? Most people, when they're doing philosophy, what they're doing is they're just doing rationalization. They're not really doing inquiry. The next trap of philosophy is debating, arguing, debunking, and critiquing. These are extremely popular, especially on YouTube, on Reddit, online, on forums, and so forth. This is not serious philosophy. Debating about which philosopher was right and which was wrong, this is not serious philosophy. Because when you're debating, you're not doing inquiry. You're trying to argue towards some kind of conclusion. You're doing rationalization. The mind is extremely good at rationalization. In fact, the mind can rationalize absolutely anything. The mind can rationalize raping and gassing children. So do you think the mind will have any problem rationalizing whatever philosopher or philosophy you think is the best? Your mind will convince you that any philosophy is the best, if you so desire. There's no limit to what your mind can rationalize. How do you know that's true? Look at human history. Look at intellectual history of the last 2,000 years. Humans have believed all sorts of crazy things and rationalized it to themselves. You can rationalize torturing people. You can rationalize lying. You can rationalize building a cult. So be careful. The next trap is history of philosophy and scholarship. Like I said, one of my biggest critiques of academic philosophy is that it's not really philosophy. It's not inquiry. What it is it's reading the writings of old dead white men and then regurgitating them and memorizing them and debating over them and interpreting them and then asking questions like, well, did Descartes mean this, or did he mean this, or did he mean that? And who was, who's better on this point, Hume or Descartes, or Plato or Aristotle? This is not serious philosophy. Reading the works of another philosopher and then trying to nitpick it and doing scholarship on it, trying to figure out what did David Hume say, what did Aristotle say, what did Plato really mean? This is not philosophy. You're not inquiring into anything when you do this. This is a huge mistake. It's so obvious, but this is what they teach you in university. It's not real philosophy. Deciphering ancient texts is not philosophy. Getting too technical and academic, getting bogged down in all sorts of trivia and technicalities, this is not true philosophy. This is a distraction. Philosophy is about basic, simple and fundamental questions. It doesn't hinge on technicalities. And the reason that is because you can be technically correct about many things, but then grossly misunderstand the larger picture. Philosophy is about the big picture, getting the big picture right, not the technicalities. A lot of what happens in philosophy departments in universities is that they completely ignore the big picture and they earn their PhDs and write all their papers on such minor technical minutia, which really doesn't serve them. It doesn't increase their understanding of reality, of themselves, and it doesn't really appeal or is practical to the majority of mankind, which is why academic philosophy is rightly looked down upon. Academic philosophy is a complete bastardization of what philosophy should be. Philosophy is not writing and publishing papers. It has nothing to do with publishing papers. It doesn't matter how many papers you've published. That does not make you a good philosopher. I've published 0 papers. Other philosophers at MIT or Stanford or Harvard have published hundreds of papers. I guarantee you I have better philosophy skills than those people. I have a deeper understanding of reality. That's the ultimate thing. Philosophy is not subscribing to some philosophy or philosopher. So one of the biggest mistakes you can make is to say something like, you know what, I'm a capitalist, I'm a Marxist, I'm a Cartesian, I'm an empiricist, I'm a rationalist, I'm an atheist, I'm a solipsist, I'm a whatever, and then defend that position. I'm a libertarian, and then spend the rest of your life defending that position. That's not serious philosophy. You're just identifying with an ideology. Or even worse, you're attaching yourself to some human persona, like you really love Descartes, or you really admire Plato, or you really admire Hegel, or you admire Jacques Derrida, or whatever. Who gives a fuck? I don't give a fuck who you admire. It doesn't matter who you admire. Philosophy is not the pursuit of a personality cult. It's not about status. It's not about credentials. It's pure understanding. The true measure of philosophers is how deeply do you understand yourself, mankind, the workings of the mind, consciousness, and reality. That's it. Everything else is a sideshow. It's a distraction. It's a red herring. Philosophy is not making proofs or proving things to others. This is a big mistake. You can fall into this trap of like, oh, I gotta prove my understanding of reality to somebody. No, you don't. Whether you understand something or not is one thing, and whether you can prove something to somebody is a totally different thing. First of all, there are such deep things you can recognize about reality that you won't be able to prove it to anybody, number one. Number two, even those things that are supposedly provable, there are people out there who are so close-minded and stubborn that you won't be able to prove to them that water is wet. That's not your problem. That's their problem. And in fact, most people are like this. Most people are so stubborn that there's many things you can't prove to them, which are true. But you're never going to prove it to them because they're not interested in truth. They're too biased and too close-minded. The next trap of philosophy is judging the quality of philosophy based on authority, credentials, and status. Thinking that Plato is a great philosopher just because he's Plato. No. What if Plato's a bad philosopher? What if Descartes is a bad philosopher? What if his philosophy is bad? It's not even about the person, it's about their ideas. Their ideas can just be bad. Ideas from Plato can be just as bad as ideas from a Nazi. Bad ideas are a dime a dozen. Almost everybody has bad ideas, including very intelligent people have bad ideas. Einstein had bad ideas. So one's authority does not guarantee your ideas are good or valid. And no matter how many good ideas you've had up to this point, the next idea you have could be a bad idea. See? Just because, let's say Einstein was still alive and still doing physics, that doesn't mean his physics are right. He could easily still be doing, the next theory he publishes could be the wrong one. And it's a mistake to put him on a pedestal and say, oh, this is Einstein. It doesn't matter. The next trap is using philosophy and theory as a way to avoid facing the realities of survival and practical life. You can turn philosophy into sort of escape. This is a huge trap, especially for those of us who are very intellectual. So one of the things in my work and the way that I do philosophy is I force myself to come into contact with reality. I don't just sit around on the couch brainstorming stuff all day, although I do. But I put my philosophy to the test in the real world. I do business. I run a business. I have to make money. I have to be profitable. I go out, I socialize. I talk to girls, for example. That puts all theory to the test. It's one thing to sit around on your armchair and say, oh, relationships should work like this and sexuality should work like this and girls should be attracted to this thing and not that thing. And I think this is the right way to attract girls. When you go into a loud-ass Vegas nightclub, music is fucking blasting your ears so loud you can't even think straight. And you have to approach a fucking group of 20 hot girls that are all dolled up and shit and dancing crazy and drunk. That's a very different situation. No philosophy will save you then. Also, when it comes to your own emotions and suffering, when you have a breakup, when you lose $100,000, when your neighbor runs over your favorite cat, when your parent dies or your child dies, when your girlfriend gets raped, this is the real test of your philosophy. How are you going to react when people criticize you, attack you, make insults at you, troll you online? How do you respond? This is the true test of your philosophy. And you will see very quickly that all of your philosophy crumbles in the face of reality. One of the things that I really look down upon is someone who's a philosopher, really high, noble philosopher, but then isn't able to run a business, isn't able to buy himself a house, isn't able to go attract a girlfriend. This is a misuse of philosophy. What I believe in is that you should do very deep theoretical work and you should balance it out with a lot of practice, and then you should synthesize those two together. And in fact, the practice will help to inform and ground your work, because otherwise your work is going to be very airy-fairy. You're going to be talking about chakras and spirits and past lives and all this sorts of shit. But then in real life, you're going to be miserable because you can't get a girlfriend. You don't have your car broke down. You can't pay for an oil change because you're so broke. Your parents kicked you out of your house. You have nowhere to live. You're homeless. You're suicidal. Your emotions are out of control. And you're sitting there doing philosophy. No, you're fooling yourself. You're not a real philosopher. Real philosophy requires embodying your understanding of reality. When you truly understand situations and things, it's not theory. You're not just writing a textbook. This is transforming you at a deep level. It's transforming your emotional system. It's transforming how you interact with humans. It's transforming the words that come out of your mouth. It's transforming the depth of your capacity to love. It's transforming how you think of yourself. It's transforming how you suffer. It transforms how happy you are, whether you're depressed or not, whether you argue with people, whether you're a jerk and an asshole to people, or whether you're kind and loving. All of this is affected by real philosophy. So a lot, and of course this is threatening, because this requires changing yourself. A lot of people would prefer that philosophy not actually touch oneself and one's life, because then it can be done in a purely conceptual manner. Then it's safe. It's safe to sit on your couch and think whatever theories you want and then just go about your normal life. You don't have to change. But if you're doing really deep philosophy, you think about stuff and then you realize, wait a minute, I have to change my behavior. For example, if I'm thinking about animal consciousness and I realize that animals are actually sentient and maybe even intelligent, then that means I can't just go to Burger King anymore the way that I used to and get the same old burgers that are factory farmed. You have to change, but that's not comfortable. So most people, the people who say that philosophy is just mental masturbation, their problem is that they actually want it that way because they're too weak and they're too afraid to do the serious philosophy, which would put the burden on them now to take a lot more responsibility for their behaviors. People don't want to take that kind of responsibility. If you did true philosophy, you might have to quit your job because you would find that your job is immoral and unethical. You might have to end a relationship because you realize you're just doing this relationship for some sort of cheap, shallow sex and you don't really love this person. You might have to end that because you realize that, true philosophy will maybe tell you that you got to get love from your relationships, for example. Stuff like that. That's extremely threatening. If you're a scientist or an academic and you do serious philosophy the way I'm telling you, eventually you might come to the point where you realize you have to leave science and academia behind because it will not get you to the ultimate truth and the ultimate aim of philosophy. And that's going to be extremely threatening to you because how are you going to cope with that after you've invested 20, 30 years into science and academia? And that's what you use to put bread on your table and feed your children. Are you going to have enough integrity and courage to quit? Most people won't, which is why they never even begin serious philosophy, because it's too threatening. Serious philosophy is very threatening. In fact, that's a really good way to know whether you're doing serious philosophy or you're just bullshitting. Is how threatened are you by the work? It should scare you. Serious philosophy is so serious that you might even reach a point where you think that you're losing your sanity. And at that point, you still have to keep going. You're not done. Because see, when most people get to the point of thinking that they think that they're losing their sanity, then they get afraid and say, oh, okay, I better stop and just go back and watch some TV and just do what normal people do. But you failed. Philosophy requires very deep courage. It's the courage of truth-seeking. If truth leads you to insanity, a true philosopher will choose to become insane. Because that's the truth. So you have to get very clear as to what your priorities are. And if anything is a higher priority for you than truth, then you're going to fail at philosophy. And that's exactly what happens to most philosophers, including the academic ones, the scientific ones, the professional ones. And the last trap of philosophy that I'll mention here is political activism and power games. Philosophy is not about achieving some political goals, like ushering in a Marxist revolution, or power games like your party winning the presidency or something like that, or you having power in your university. This is not serious philosophy. Because as soon as you start to care about winning these power games, what happens is you have to stop caring about truth. Power becomes a higher priority than truth. And as soon as this happens, you've sold your soul to the devil. Because remember, philosophy is about pure understanding. We don't really care where the understanding leads us to. We don't care what the consequences of the understanding are. And the reason we don't care about that is because we don't even know what the consequences will be. We don't know what the consequences of finding the ultimate truth will be, assuming there even is such a thing. But let's just assume there is. What are the consequences? Will it make you happy? Will it make you suicidal? We don't know. But a real philosopher will say, I want the truth anyways, even if it's going to make me suicidal. Why? Because a true philosopher cares about understanding for its own sake. Damn the costs. If you're not comfortable with that, then you shouldn't be doing philosophy. Now you might say, well, Leo, aren't these just your biased ideas of what philosophy should be? After all, who made you the king of philosophy? Why don't you teach philosophy in a more neutral way? The way that a university professor might. Because see, a university professor is not going to be as forceful with you as I am here. That might make it seem as though I'm kind of biased. And in a sense, I am biased. You know what I'm biased towards? I'm biased towards truth. I'm forceful because if I'm not forceful with you, then you're going to engage in bullshit. And bullshit is the obstacle to truth. So we have to be very ruthless in cutting out the bullshit. So yeah, my style of philosophy is extremely ruthless about bullshit. As incredible as this sounds, philosophy has a tangible endpoint. There are right and wrong ways of doing philosophy. And here's what the endpoint is. The endpoint is this. It's possible to understand yourself and reality completely. Completely. Imagine this. Open your mind to this possibility. Now, maybe I'm wrong. You don't know if I'm right yet, and I'm not asking you to just to believe me blindly. This is something you have to prove to yourself by doing it. But just open your mind to the possibility that you can do so much philosophy so deeply if you do it in the right way that eventually you will come to complete understanding of yourself and reality. Now, either that's possible or it's not. The problem is you don't know which. The only way you could know is by trying it, seeing if you can do it. In the same way that you don't know how high you can jump until you try jumping. So don't just dismiss this possibility right off the bat without trying it. You have to try it, and you have to try it seriously. That's how science works. Science requires serious experimentation. You can't just do a half-assed experiment. You have to do a genuine, honest experiment, with your full effort and see if it pans out and works. I'm sweating a bit under this mask. Okay. So my claim is that if you do philosophy correctly, you will answer every existential question that you have about reality. And you will understand why everything exists precisely as it exists. This is possible to answer. But the answer is so profound that it cannot be put easily into words. Although I've done so in other episodes. But you are correct in your skepticism in that, see, the reason you're skeptical about this, and you might think that what I'm saying here is impossible, fantastic, exaggerated, or delusional, is because you just don't know anybody in real life who has achieved this. In fact, you don't know almost of a single philosopher in Western philosophy who has achieved this, or who even claims this is possible. Usually, philosophers play this game of humility where they just try to act like, oh, well, there's so much stuff in the world, it's so complicated, we can't know it. We can't possibly know it. This is false humility of people who don't know what they're talking about. Any philosopher who tells you that this is impossible is simply full of shit. And the reason that is because it's not that they're lying, it's just that they don't know how to do proper philosophy. Because philosophy is so tricky and complicated that almost nobody has succeeded in doing it properly. In fact, this is so common that it's gotten so bad to the point where if you tell people there is a proper way to do philosophy, they will argue with you about this. And they'll say, no, Leo, there isn't. It's all just subjective and relative. And these are just all your biases and you're just delusional. Well, that's one possibility. But the other possibility is that it's actually possible, but you have to be very strict about your doing of philosophy. You can't just take it willy-nilly and do it any which way you want. Now I want to introduce the notion of what I call pure philosophy. I'm trademarking this, pure philosophy, capital P, capital P, pure, capital philosophy. What do I mean by pure philosophy? It's philosophy that's completely free of history and named individuals, which makes it very different from academic philosophy and the history of philosophy. We don't care about Plato or Aristotle or Descartes or David Hume or Jacques Derrida or anybody. We also don't care about history. We don't care about who said what. What did they really mean? Did Plato really mean this or did they mean this? And when was this said? And, how did these ideas develop historically? We don't care. In pure philosophy, all we care about is the ideas themselves. Pure philosophy is an impersonal collection of ideas and concepts. Think of it as a spreadsheet of every possible idea and concept you could have about reality. Every perspective, every way to understand it. In pure philosophy, we then evaluate all these concepts and ideas based on their merit. We edit them freely. We reinterpret them and we blend them together to create the best possible understanding of reality. We don't care who said what. We don't care if we're interpreting Descartes correctly or not. We don't care about arguing about this philosopher versus that philosopher and so forth. We don't care about East or West. We just care about understanding reality as best as we can, and we're going to use whatever ideas invented by whomever to do this. In pure philosophy, there is no debating, there is no arguing, there is no proving, there is no debunking, and there is no ideology. This is done purely for your own understanding. As long as you understand reality correctly, that's it. We're not trying to prove it to anybody else. We're not trying to discredit anybody else. We're not trying to invent an ideology. We're not trying to write a book. We're not trying to write a research paper that gets approved by somebody. We're not interested in convincing the whole world that we're right and that they're wrong. We're not interested in being the best. We're interested simply in pure understanding of reality. And in this pursuit, we are willing to question absolutely every single assumption that mankind makes about everything it knows. Everything. We will question everything. Nothing is sacred. We will even question whether your mother is actually your mother. Everything will be questioned. We will even question 1 + 1 = 2. We will even question A equals A. We'll question everything. We're willing to burn everything down to the ground. And we do all this outside of any institution or bureaucracy, not in a university, not as part of some school, not as part of some group, not as part of some collective project. It's just personally you understanding reality, just pure philosophy. In pure philosophy, nothing is ever taken for granted. Everything is questioned. We even question why water is wet. In pure philosophy, everything must be explained from scratch without any appeals to authority, history, status, cultural norms, or even morality. We will even question, is rape bad? We will question that. That's not taken for granted that rape is bad. We have to derive whether it is or not. And maybe it isn't. We're open to that. With pure philosophy, we have infinite open-mindedness. We're open to absolutely anything, and we don't care about the consequences of any of our ideas. That means that if we have some idea that is going to annihilate the entirety of mankind, we will choose to annihilate all of mankind just to get a glimpse of that idea. Because we just care about pure understanding. If we get to the point where our understanding grows so deeply that we annihilate the entire universe and all the living beings in it, we will take the understanding over the entire universe and all the living beings. If we have to torture somebody to understand what the universe is, we will torture as many people as possible to understand what the universe is. That's pure philosophy. Like radical. I'm talking about radical things. I'm talking about dangerous things. We understand that what we're doing here is very dangerous and threatening to society and to mankind. And we appreciate that, but also we understand that we can't be meek here and we can't be scared. We have to pursue the truth at all costs. That's pure philosophy. In pure philosophy, we make a profound study of self-deception. We assume that the doer of the philosophy is in the greatest danger of self-deception. We don't worry about the self-deceptions of anybody else except ourselves. And this is a constant, perennial danger that we have to worry about. We worry about it from now to the end of our lives. And with pure philosophy, we are crucially concerned with the transcendence, well, first of all, with the identification, and then the transcendence of all of our biases, especially our personal biases. We're not interested in the biases of other people. You're interested in your own biases as a philosopher, and your understanding is trying to transcend every possible bias you have, whatever it might be. If you like kitty cats, that's a bias you have. You as a philosopher have to be concerned about that and how it's going to skew your ability to understand reality. That's pure philosophy. To me, this is what philosophy actually is. When I say philosophy, that's what I mean. I don't mean what's done in universities. What's done in universities should not even be called philosophy because they ain't doing this. They're not doing what I just described. There are really 4 questions at the heart of pure philosophy, just 4 From these 4 questions, every other question is derived. Here it is. And I'll throw in a 5th bonus one, but here's the 4 key ones. Write them down. These are the most important questions in the universe. Write these down. Number 1, how the fuck is anything possible? Number 2, what the fuck is anything? Number 3, where the fuck did you come from? Number 4, what the fuck is consciousness? And the 5th bonus one is, how do I live the best life? That's it. That's the heart of philosophy. If you can answer these 5 questions, you've figured out the whole universe. That's powerful. Now, of course, there's many other questions you can ask, which we can consider sub-questions of these questions. You can ask questions like, how do we create a great society? That's a good philosophical question. But all of that is secondary to these core questions. So I'm not saying you can't specialize. You can have your more narrow interests, but just be careful not to get lost in the minutia. It's very easy to get distracted pursuing some kind of tangent here and then miss the big questions. How can you call yourself a philosopher and not be interested in these 5 core big questions that I outlined for you here? If you're not interested in answering these, then what are you doing? You're chasing after peanuts. Don't miss the elephant in the room. That's the mistake that most philosophers make, is they're chasing after peanuts. Okay, here are the top techniques for serious philosophers. Number 1, sit down and contemplate for hours in solitude. Actually do this. This takes work. This is hard. Thinking is hard. Sitting alone in a room by yourself late at night for 2 hours, thinking about something deliberately, with focus. This is more than most people are willing to do. Most people probably haven't done this even once in their whole life. Try it. Do it. Number 2, asking powerful questions and getting better and better at asking more powerful questions. Clarifying your questions. Honing your questions. Number 3, simplicity, clarity, and cutting through all human bullshit. This is key. A huge mistake in academic philosophy is that they get so jargony, so technical. They use giant words and complex vocabulary. This all obscures the pure pursuit of understanding. One of the things that I've tried to model in my work with Actualized.org is I've deliberately dumbed down all of my language, deliberately, not because I don't have access to fancy vocabulary words and academic jargon. I could have done that, and it would have made my work seem much more intellectual and academic. I deliberately didn't do that because, to me, if you understand something, you should be able to communicate it as though to a child using simple vocabulary. And, by the way, when you do access omniscience and absolute truth, as I claim is possible, your understanding will be so pure and so powerful and so direct and so clear that you will not use complicated jargon to explain it. You'll be able to explain it very simply with simple metaphors, basic vocabulary. You'll be able to explain it to a child. I can explain the nature of the entire universe to a child. I don't need to write some complicated philosophical manuscript that only a PhD professor can decipher after 5 years of parsing the words. Look at my teachings. My teachings are extremely clear. The reason that is because if they weren't, if my own mind wasn't clear enough, I would never have been able to reach the levels of understanding that I've been able to reach. The only reason I've been able to reach these levels of understanding is because I've been ruthless, monstrously ruthless with cutting through all of bullshit. All of mankind's bullshit, all of the bullshit in philosophy, all the bullshit in science, and all the bullshit of intellectuals and all of my own bullshit as well. The next technique for serious philosophers is radical skepticism. Be skeptical of anything, of everything. Question everything. But also don't abuse skepticism. You have to also apply skepticism to all of your own ideas and skepticism itself. For this, see my episode called, I believe it's called False versus True Skepticism, which explains the mistakes of misusing skepticism. So the proper use of skepticism is necessary. The next technique for serious philosophers is study all philosophies a little bit so that you're familiar with the entire landscape of philosophy. Rather than going deep on one philosopher, do a shallow overview of all the different philosophies that are out there. This will help you much more. So watch lectures, videos, read books and summaries, read Wikipedia to get a cursory overview of the whole landscape. The next top technique is explore radical perspectives and points of view. You should be thirsting for an exploration of different perspectives. Every time you see or hear of a new, totally unique perspective on some situation or the world, you should be excited about that. And you should make a catalog of all these different perspectives, because all these are just like possibilities in the whole landscape. The next technique for serious philosophers is radical open-mindedness. You need to be so open-minded, you can't even imagine. Uncomfortable levels of open-mindedness are required. The reason most philosophers never reach omniscience is simply because they're not open-minded enough. Actually, this is a technical thing that I'm saying right now. It's technically true in a way that you won't understand until you reach the end, but the only way your mind can understand all of reality is if it has infinite requisite variety. That's a technical term. I have a very important episode on my blog called Requisite Variety. Go check that out to understand what I mean. Basically, you need to have infinite mental flexibility in order to understand what reality is at the ultimate level. And virtually no human is capable of this, which is why the things that I'm saying here are so rare and incredible sounding. The next technique for serious philosophers is question science as though it were a religion. Do not take any of the models or ideas or assumptions of science as true or as a given. For example, science will tell you that you will die after your body dies. That's accepted within science. You can't accept that. You need to question that. Science will tell you that consciousness is generated by the brain, because if we hit your brain with a hammer or a bullet, that's going to ruin your consciousness. You can't accept that. You need to question that. Science will tell you that the universe is 14 billion years old and came from the Big Bang. You can't accept that. You have to question that. Science will tell you that you came from your mother. You can't accept that. You have to question that. The next serious technique for philosophers is psychedelics. To me, there is no philosophy without psychedelics. In fact, I will go ahead and make the bold claim that if you don't do psychedelics, you will never understand the true nature of reality, and you're not a serious philosopher. So you must commit to at least 100 psychedelic trips if you want to be a serious philosopher. If you think you can do it without this, you're fooling yourself. You can't do it. You won't do it. I guarantee you'll fail. And this is one of the greatest mistakes that philosophers throughout history have made. Although, you might say, well, Leo, but Descartes didn't use psychedelics and David Hume didn't use psychedelics and they were great philosophers, so how can you say this? Well, first of all, they weren't great philosophers. They had no idea what they were talking about. Um, almost all the great philosophers in history that are idolized and lionized by academics, they were amateurs. They're not serious philosophers. But, also speaking of which, did you know that nearly all the ancient philosophers in Greece and in Rome did psychedelics? Plato and Aristotle did psychedelics. Yeah, this is a little known fact. What did they do? Did they do weed? No, they had a psychedelic called kykeon, which was actually part of the Eleusinian Mysteries. So for hundreds of years, the ancient Greeks and Romans would have this ceremony that they did every few years. They would do a pilgrimage to the city of Eleusis, and there they would administer a psychedelic drink called the kykeon, which was made out of fermented wheat, which actually contained ergot, which is actually where LSD is derived from. So they were literally drinking LSD. So when Plato is talking about the allegory of the cave, if you're familiar with that, classic philosophical metaphor, he's talking about his insights from taking LSD. Ta-da! How do you think Plato got so smart? Why do you think the ancient Greek philosophers were so smart, so wise? Because they were tripping balls, that's how. See, they don't teach you this in school. The next serious technique is keep a commonplace book. What is a commonplace book? It's basically a repository of all of your notes and quotes that you've collected throughout your whole life. I have a separate episode called How to Use and Keep a Commonplace Book. Go check that out. I actually show you examples of my commonplace book, how I keep it in digital form. That's very important for a philosopher. The next technique is write down all of your major insights. You will have so many insights once you begin this process that you're going to have so many, you're going to forget to write them all down. But then with an insight arises, and if you don't write it down, usually you're going to forget. So write all your insights down on your phone or wherever you want. The next technique for serious philosophers is do serious meditation practice. Go to some meditation retreats. Some Buddhist ones are good. Some Vipassana ones are good. As far as your meditation practice, I recommend Shinzen Young's mindfulness meditation with labeling. That's what it's called. I have an episode called Mindfulness Meditation where I explain that technique and I teach it to you. But if you want, you can learn it from Shinzen Young or one of these other meditation teachers that is out there you can find on YouTube and elsewhere. Meditation is a crucial technique for philosophers. And even though I shit on meditation these days a lot because it's simply not powerful enough to get you to the ultimate levels of understanding that you'll need, it's still a very important technique. I've done years of meditation. I've done retreats. I've had sober enlightenment experiences. So this is all important. Fundamentally, what meditation teaches you is how to calm down your mind and really focus inwards on your sensations, which is a lot of what intellectuals and Western academics are terrible at doing. This fucking mask. Okay, next. Make a deep study of psychology and sociology. It's not really possible to do good philosophy without psychology and sociology, because you need to see how your own mind works and all the sort of tricks and biases that the mind has. And also what you need an understanding of how broader culture works and how culture influences the mind and programs your mind with various kinds of social conditioning. You need to be able to see the social matrix, so to speak. You need to see it so deeply that you see science as part of the social matrix. You see academic philosophy in universities as part of the social matrix. You start to see religion as part of the social matrix. I'll talk more about sociology in the future. I'll teach it more. But in the meantime, go check out my episode called the social matrix, which explains that concept. The next technique you need is working with making and collapsing distinctions. Distinctions are a crucial and profound thing that basically explain the nature of all of existence. So you want to contemplate what a distinction is. For that, I have some episodes where I talk about distinctions and what they are and how they work, and I talk about dualities. Go check out my episode, like I said, Learning Equals Making Distinctions, and also my episode called Understanding Duality, Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, which is all about various kinds of distinctions. The next technique you need as a serious philosopher is generate specific and powerful examples. That's how I do most of my philosophy, is I sit down and I generate examples, and then I analyze those examples and I see how those examples work. For example, see, already I'm using an example to explain to you. But like, for example, if I'm trying to understand, let's say, how attraction works with women, rather than just sitting and speculating, what I will do is I will come up with specific examples. Like, oh, there was that one girl I attracted, and there was that other girl, and that other girl, and that girl, she didn't get attracted. And then I analyze those 4 examples, and I ask myself the question of like, okay, so what was the attraction in all these examples? And then what was the lack of attraction in that one other example? And then I'll look at that, and then from there I will get my insights and do my observation. See, observation doesn't just happen in the outer world. It's not like you're only observing, animals and plants and objects in the world. You can also do observation on the inside. You can observe how your own mind works, how your thinking process works, or you can observe examples in your own mind. But then you have to generate those examples first, and they have to be clear and specific. The next technique we already talked about, which is observation. Go see my episode called Learning Equals Observation. That explains that. The next technique is master language, clear communication, and the articulation of your ideas. It took me years and decades to get to the point where I'm able to articulate abstract ideas so clearly and precisely as I do in my work. And in fact, if you find my work remarkable, that's probably one of the things that makes you think it's remarkable, is my ability to do this. This didn't happen by accident. Literally thousands of hours of practicing in the shower, in the car, when I'm going to bed, on the couch, cooking dinner, doing laundry. I'm standing there, and in my own mind, I'm articulating these ideas. I'm not verbalizing it with my mouth, but in my own, inner monologue, I'm constantly refining my ideas, asking how can I make it a little bit more clear? What kind of, where can I use a better word to explain something? This takes a lot of practice, but it's a super powerful and unique skill set. It's one of those skill sets that will take you years and decades to develop. So start working on it bit by bit, because you got to do a little bit at a time. You can't just sit down and do it all in one weekend. It doesn't work like that. It's a long-term investment that you make, but it's going to be so important for you as a philosopher. The next technique for serious philosophy is engage other intellectuals in philosophical conversation and dialogue, but not debate. Find somebody online or some friends you have in your university or wherever in your social circle with whom you can have deep existential conversations and dialogues without any ideological debate, right? So don't go on Reddit arguing with people about your philosophy. That's not what I'm talking about here. Dialogue. Try to find high quality minds, because there's a lot of stupid people on the internet who you can argue with endlessly, who are ideologues. This is not going to help you. This is actually going to retard your development as a philosopher. It's not about quantity of people, it's quality. Find 1 or 2 high quality people with whom you could have these kinds of conversations. If you need help with that, check out Actualized, the Actualized forum, where you can find people who are like-minded, who are into this stuff, with whom you can have these kinds of dialogues. Although also we have debates there too, but it's hard to avoid debates these days, especially online. But you can find some people there. Try to befriend them. Try to have offline conversations. You can have Skype conversations, or you can meet in person. Ideally this would be in person. If you're still in university, this is a great opportunity for you to find these kinds of people at your university. That's going to be the easiest thing. Or, if you want, even if you're out of university, you can go to a university and find some people in the philosophy department or wherever that are interested in this kind of stuff. You can also find these kinds of people in various kinds of spiritual circles. The next technique for you is writing. Write out your ideas, your thoughts. Do philosophy on paper. That helps to keep things organized, and it helps to keep you honest. It's easier to bullshit yourself in your mind than it is on paper. Because on paper, the next day you read what you wrote, and you're probably going to be disgusted with yourself. At least you should be, because most of the stuff you're going to write is going to be horseshit, honestly. But it's still good to write it out, because that is the process of you growing and developing. Also, that helps you articulate your ideas. And the last technique is start a YouTube channel or a blog, or start speaking publicly. You can go to your local Toastmasters, which you can find in any city in the world, basically. Start actually speaking about some of these ideas you have. Get them out there. That's going to help you to refine your ideas, make them more concise, simplify them. And then one of the best ways to learn philosophy is to teach philosophy. You know how much growth I got in the last 10 years of doing Actualized.org, publishing all this content? I learned so much philosophy that I wouldn't be able to have learned otherwise, simply because I have to, just to put out quality content every week, I just have to do so much research, and I have to think very carefully and methodically and hold my own feet to the fire. And also, people give feedback, and that also holds my feet to the fire, because I get a lot of criticism that I have to listen to. Can't really even avoid it if I wanted to. Okay, here's Leo's top advice for philosophers. Do not neglect the practical, business, and survival aspects of life. Don't use philosophy as an escape from facing life and handling in a masterful way basic survival stuff, like having sex, getting a girlfriend, getting a spouse, having a family, having a job, managing your finances, having a nice place to live, and so forth. And develop some practical skills in addition to the abstract philosophical skills. It's not enough just to know how to think. You want practical skills. You want to develop some practical skills like computer programming, or drawing, or music composition, or sales copywriting, or sales skills, cooking skills, engineering skills, that kind of stuff. Because chances are you're not going to be making much money off your philosophy, especially not in the beginning. The next tip is don't turn philosophy into a defense of any kind of dogma, ideology, worldview, or pet theory that you have. True philosophy is not about pet theories. It's about pursuing truth, which actually means you're going to have to kill all your pet theories. That's the cost of pursuing truth. The truth, I guarantee you that the truth is not your pet theory. Your pet theory is a fantasy. It's not the truth. Don't fool yourself. The next piece of advice I have for you is keep your philosophy simple and clear. Don't get lost in academic and technical jargon. Like I said, articulate your ideas so clearly that a child can understand you. And if you can't, that means you probably don't understand what you're talking about. The next advice I have for you is be careful of your pet theories and intuitions. A lot of times you have intuitions and they're just wrong. They turn out to just be your personal biases. So question your pet theories and intuitions. The next piece of advice is that consciousness is key. Consciousness. 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 Remember this word, consciousness. Everything is going to boil down to consciousness. So study consciousness the most. What is consciousness? What is truth? This is your North Star. This is what will keep you from getting lost in all sorts of stupid cul-de-sacs within philosophy. Always come back to what is consciousness. In the end, you will not understand the ultimate nature of reality without answering the question of what is consciousness. You need to have a crystal clear, direct experience of what is consciousness. And there are many degrees of this that you can have. Many of you guys who follow me and have had a few awakenings, you think you understand what consciousness is. You don't. I promise you, you don't. You do not understand what consciousness is. And if you think consciousness is nothing, you don't understand what consciousness is. Consciousness is not nothing, although it also is nothing. But let's not get bogged down on that. Next piece of advice is be more open-minded. You're not being nearly open-minded enough. The next piece of advice, enjoy the process. Remember, this is not a mad rush to get to the ultimate truth and to omniscience and to answer all the questions. No, this process realistically will take you a few decades from start to finish. And really, there is no finish line per se. You're going to keep doing more and more philosophy. Even though I've sort of reached the end of philosophy, I still keep doing it every day anyways, and I still generate more insights, which just sort of like deepens my understanding of the core ultimate truth. But look, enjoy the process. Enjoy asking questions. Enjoy not knowing. This is actually beautiful. Because once you're done with the process, so to speak, once you reach the end and you have the ultimate truth, you're going to look fondly back at all the years you spent struggling, trying to figure it all out. And you're going to see that this was all a beautiful journey. It's like a film. It's like a movie. You don't want to get to the end of the movie and to see the climax of the movie. You want the whole process. The beginning of the movie is as good as the climax of the movie. Enjoy the whole show. Love the doing of philosophy even more than you want the answers. But also not too much. Don't love the doing of philosophy so much that you just endlessly go around in circles like an academic and get nowhere. That is a problem. So you do want the end result. You're moving towards an end result, but you're also enjoying the process. The next piece of advice is embody your philosophy. Don't leave it just purely academic. The next piece of advice is beware of self-deception. Remember this word, self-deception, self-deception, self-deception. Everything is going to boil down to self-deception. Not somebody else's, your self-deception. Not my self-deception, your self-deception. The next piece of advice, try to generate some practical insights while you're at it. Insights can be practical. They can change your life. You can generate insights about how to make money. Why not use that power? Philosophy is not just for pure abstract existential questions. It's also for practical stuff. Be smart about that. It's okay to have some materialistic pursuits. In fact, it's necessary. Don't demonize the materialistic stuff, especially if you don't have it yet. You can transcend it later, but if you don't even have it yet, you have nothing to transcend. Don't fool yourself about that. The next piece of advice is be an original thinker. Don't subscribe to any ancient philosopher. Think for yourself independently. Why do you need to subscribe to some philosopher? Why do you got to follow Descartes or Plato or whatever? Why? You don't need this. Think for yourself. Steal their ideas and drop them. You don't need the person, the personality. And Plato is not going to be offended if you never think of him. The next piece of advice is contemplate. Read less, contemplate more. Contemplation is way more powerful than reading. 1 hour of contemplation is worth 100 hours of reading. Next piece of advice, do not get attached to any one school of philosophy like Buddhism. So many people get fooled and deluded by Buddhism because they think they found, finally, the greatest philosophy ever, Buddhism, the absolute truth. No. It's dogma. It's groupthink. Next piece of advice, keep it simple and pure. Focus on the ideas and the insights. Don't get bogged down in deciphering dense technical philosophy. Some philosophers are very difficult to read. If you go try to read Hegel or Kant, you're going to spend a month just trying to understand what the fuck they're saying. This is not a good use of your time. Instead, what you can do is you can go to Wikipedia, type in Hegel or Kant, and you can get a quick summary of their ideas. You don't need their technical arguments. You don't need to understand every sentence they wrote. What you need is just a general idea of their ideas, which should be summarizable in a few minutes or in an hour, in one video or on one Wikipedia page. It should not be hard for you to understand what Kant or Hegel wrote or what they taught. You can figure that out in 1 hour on Wikipedia. You don't need to spend a month reading their stupid treatises, which are arcane and esoteric and very difficult to comprehend. This is a huge mistake that philosophers make, is they actually take on the burden of trying to fucking, read the original Hegel. It doesn't matter what Hegel wrote. What matters are the ideas in Hegel. Wikipedia is your greatest friend. There are so many great summaries of philosophies on Wikipedia. The next piece of advice is study self-help. Traditionally, the self-help field is sort of considered inferior to philosophy, and it kind of is. It's not as prestigious. It's not really taught in universities and so forth, but there's a lot of profound and important lessons within self-help. And the self-help field, when combined with philosophy, that's what's going to make it very personal. It's going to start to, affect your own life and your own development. And it's also going to make it more practical, because academic philosophy is so dry and so abstract that you don't see how it can possibly help you in your life. You want to bridge the gap between those two. And, you've already found Actualized.org, and that will help you with that a lot, because that's what all of my work is about, is bridging the gap between those two. So I've already done most of that work for you. Watch my content, and there it is. But also you should, read some classic self-help books and watch some classic self-help teachers, stuff like that. The next piece of advice is be careful with over-specialization and siloing. So what happens in universities is that everything is siloed and over-specialized. So nobody is studying the very big picture of philosophy in a university. In a university, every philosophy department is like broken down. One person is studying Descartes. Another professor is an expert on Hegel. Another one is an expert on moral philosophy. Another one is an expert on philosophy of language. And it's all siloed, and nobody is integrating all of that together into the ultimate understanding because they think that's impossible. It's not impossible. It's just that you're not doing it. And not just within philosophy, but look, you need to integrate not just philosophy, science, religion, mysticism, the New Age, spirituality, self-help. Integrate all of these together. Psychology as well, sociology as well, developmental psychology. Integrate everything together into a holistic understanding. This is how you reach omniscience. You can't reach omniscience through only studying philosophy, or only studying science, or only studying the New Age, or only studying self-help, or only studying psychology. It won't work. The next piece of advice is make clarity one of your highest values. Clarity. You can't reach truth without clarity. I'm going to have a whole episode on clarity in the future, so that will cover that. The next piece of advice is I want to reiterate for you that history of philosophy is not the doing of philosophy. These are two different things. Don't be fooled by that. And also, memorizing and parroting the words of other philosophers is not true philosophy. And the final piece of advice is beware of intellectual fads. All throughout philosophy and in every era, in every culture, there are intellectual fads. You need to break free of these fads to reach the ultimate understanding and to do serious philosophy. All right, so now, which philosophies are worth reading and studying? I'm going to give you very concrete answers. Usually, if you ask this of a university professor, they wouldn't want to answer this kind of question because they want to say, well, you should decide for yourself. Just read everything and decide for yourself. I mean, yeah, in theory, that would be nice. The problem is most of us don't have time to study and read every philosophy and every philosopher. There's way too many of them. So again, you can call me biased, and some of these will be my biases. But then again, I have become conscious of absolute truth and the ultimate nature of consciousness and reality and omniscience. So in retrospect, I can clearly look at all the different philosophers and philosophies out there that I've studied and looked at, and I can tell you which ones are really good and which ones are really bad and save you a lot of time. Now, of course, you don't know if what I'm telling you is true or not. From your point of view, this could all just be my biases, but I'm going to tell it to you anyways, just in case you want to believe me or not. I don't really care if you believe me or don't. So, people will disagree and argue with me about this. There is no such thing as like one true philosophy. There are different schools, many different schools of philosophies and different philosophers, many of whom had a pretty deep and good understanding. They were in the right track. They were in the right direction, in the right ballpark. And then there's other ones that are not in the right ballpark at all. So I'm going to give you a list of the ones that are in the right ballpark, that are good, that are really worth your time. And then I'm going to give you a list of the ones that are not worth your time. All right, so here we go. The following philosophies are quite good and worth your time: skepticism, Pyrrhonism, idealism, relativism, political philosophy. It's good to just study different kind of political systems. There's not one true political philosophy, but just the whole field is good to study. Eastern philosophy has a lot of really good, profound, truthful stuff in it. Zen, Buddhism, Hinduism, and just various kinds of Hindu philosophies like Vedanta, for example, really good. Lots of great stuff. Dzogchen, which is spelled D-Z-O-G Chen, Dzogchen. It's a sort of offshoot of Buddhism. Mysticism is good to study. Non-duality is really good. Meditation, various meditation techniques are great. Monism is really good. Solipsism is good, and yoga is good. Many different kinds of yoga. Again, this doesn't mean that all of these are perfect and correct. There's a lot of problems with all of these. No one philosophy is perfect, I would say, but these are all in the right ballpark. Now, which philosophers are most worth reading? Heraclitus, Anaximander, Anaxagoras, Plotinus, Sextus Empiricus, Hegel, and various other German idealists that came after Hegel, excluding Kant. I don't like Kant. Berkeley, which is spelled Berkeley, which is what UC Berkeley is named after. Thomas Kuhn, Paul Feyerabend, Willard Quine, Spinoza, William James, the Stoics like Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus, Sri Aurobindo, Ken Wilber, and Peter Ralston. These are all generally quite good, and some of them are incredible and amazing. All right, now, which philosophers do I consider to be overrated and really not worth your time? This is a very controversial list because this includes most philosophers that academics love, but really, honestly, they're a waste of your time. Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Descartes, Hume, Kant, the postmodernists like Derrida, Foucault, the logical positivists, especially Wittgenstein, Hobbes, Locke, Nietzsche, Heidegger, Machiavelli, Sartre, Camus, the pragmatists, the American pragmatists like Pierce, Ayn Rand, Richard Rorty, Confucius, Husserl, and Rousseau. I would not waste any time reading these philosophers. If you want, just read the summaries of their work on Wikipedia. That will be enough for you. The problem is that you could spend a decade reading these guys and you won't be any closer to understanding what reality is. That's the problem here. That's why I'm trying to simplify this for you. All right, now the question, is there one correct philosophy? In a sense, there is, in the ballpark. And this is what it is. It is a combination of idealism, panpsychism, pantheism, monism, non-duality, Zen, Buddhism, Vedanta, radical skepticism, Pyrrhonism, mysticism, holism, relativism, Hindu idealism, solipsism, subjectivism, and phenomenology. So if you take the best of all those schools of thought and you combine them all together, that's going to get you the closest to absolute truth, but it still won't get you to absolute truth. But it's the best pointer that we've got, besides my work. So, I mean, I'm biased, and I don't want to toot my own horn, but if I had to, if you're going to ask me what's the best philosophy, I'm going to say it's Actualized.org. You're going to say, well, Leo, that's so selfish of you to say so narcissistic. But then again, look at it like this. Like, I built Actualized.org with the deliberate intention of creating the best, most advanced, most sophisticated, most accurate philosophy possible. That's what Actualized.org was. That was its mission from the very beginning. I've been working on this for 10 years. I think I've done a pretty good job. Not perfect, but pretty good job, especially when you compare it to the canon of all of Western philosophy. I'm happy to compare my work to any work of any major philosopher in all of Western history, and then you judge for yourself. I mean, feel free to compare my work to Plato, to Aristotle, to Descartes, to Kant, to Hegel, to whatever. I'm pretty confident you'll find more depth and more profundity in my work than you will in all of theirs combined. But, that's just my opinion. I could be wrong. I'm biased, so take it with a grain of salt. All right, now let me answer the question of, is philosophy just mental masturbation? Is philosophy even worth doing? What if it's just a waste of time? And what can you really expect out of philosophy? So, in regards to mental masturbation, that is certainly a trap of philosophy. It can turn into that, but it doesn't have to. It really depends on how you do it. If you do it properly, it can be extremely practical and extremely worthwhile, and it can transform your whole life. And in fact, you can use it. Like I said, you can use philosophy to make lots of money. You can use philosophy to get sex. You can use philosophy to change your self-image and your self-esteem, and to change your depression and your lack of, emotional mastery. You can use philosophy to help you to meditate and to calm down your monkey mind. And you can use philosophy to make yourself more happy. You can use philosophy to gain a deeper appreciation of life. Literally more happiness. In fact, a really good philosophical question is to ask yourself, what is happiness? And how do I live the happiest possible life? That's very practical. You can use philosophy to improve your relationships. You can use your philosophy to improve your communication with other humans and your ability to empathize and to love. You can use philosophy to deprogram your mind of all sorts of ideologies, conspiracy theories, and bad ideas, which can be extremely dangerous. These days, a lot of people are getting brainwashed with fascist ideologies, Nazi ideologies, far right-wing ideologies, radical communist or Marxist ideologies. This is all toxic garbage that's going to ruin your life. People's lives are ruined by these bad philosophies. And then when it comes to the ultimate aim of philosophy, which is the access of omniscience and absolute truth and ultimate existential understanding, you might ask, well, is this practical or is this just mental masturbation? And what I can tell you about this is that this is the most worthwhile thing that a human can pursue. There is no more worthwhile thing. Once you achieve this level of understanding and comprehension, it will be the happiest moment of your life. Nothing else can compare. No amount of sex, not your wedding day, not the birth of your children, not the earning of $1 billion. None of that will compare to the peak experience you will gain when you fully comprehend the source of all of existence. I can't prove that to you. You just have to trust me on that. So yes, it's worth it. Of course it's worth it. If it wasn't worth it, why would I be talking about it? Also, understand this, that even if you want to, you can't really avoid philosophy. You might think, see, ordinary people, they fool themselves into thinking that they can avoid philosophy. You can't avoid philosophy. If you don't do philosophy deliberately, what that means is, that just means that you're going to get programmed automatically by the culture that you happen to grow up in and the era in which you live, in which you were born. You're going to be programmed with that thinking. You're going to be programmed by your environment, by your friends, teachers, colleagues, coworkers, businesses, advertisers, all of that, religion, science. Your mind's going to be programmed by all of that. Philosophy, see, that's philosophy. You're going to be programmed with all that. And that's going to be very low quality philosophy, low consciousness, low brow philosophy, which is not designed to get you to the ultimate truth or to get you to happiness or anything like that, or to get you to love. It's designed to just maintain the status quo of society and to help advertisers sell you materialistic shit that you don't even need. So the real choice, the only choice you have is, will you do philosophy deliberately? If not, that automatically means you're going to have bad philosophy. If you do decide to do philosophy deliberately, that still doesn't mean you're out of the woods. You can do it deliberately and screw it up and still have bad philosophy, but at least you have a better chance. And at least there's the opportunity that you might do it correctly by following all the principles I've outlined above, following all the tips and advice, and then eventually you'll reach to ultimate understanding and love and all sorts of beautiful, profound things, and you will purify your mind and you will break free of the social matrix in the best case scenario. And that would be very, very worth it. What can you expect out of philosophy? Well, it depends on how you do it. If you do it badly, you can expect that you're going to construct some kind of ideology. It's going to become very toxic. You might even become insane or suicidal, or you might join or start a cult. Or you just might become one of these brainwashed, ideological, political people, like one of these, MAGA people, one of these, neo-Nazi fascists, far right-wingers, or one of these radical Antifa Marxists. These are the worst case scenarios. Here's the best case scenario. And this leads us to the question of, what is the ultimate endpoint of philosophy? Where do you get to if you do it all correctly and you reach the very end? Well, here it is. I've really avoided talking about this whole episode because I didn't want to freak people out, because I could start saying some crazy things here that will completely strain your credulity. This is just an intro video that will strain your credulity to the point where you're just going to click the off button, because the truth is that where philosophy ultimately gets you is so radical and so profound that you literally cannot believe that it's going to be true. And yet it is. So I'd like you to think of philosophy as a maze or a giant tangle of wires and cords that you're trying to untangle. This is a good metaphor because what it shows you is that it is possible to reach a state where, you ever have one of those giant tangles of wires, maybe behind your TV when you were a kid? You had this giant tangle of wires. You had like video game controllers in there and RCA cables and HDMI cables, all this junk. And it was so tangled that you could barely figure out where one began and where one ended and what you even had in there. That's kind of like where you start life. It's all tangled up. Then you untangle. If you untangle correctly, now, of course, if you do it incorrectly, you could tangle it even worse. But if you do it correctly, you can untangle it, and then all your cords will be completely laid out on the floor, nicely, separated and, bow tied together with twist ties, and you'll know everything that there is. You'll understand all the cords. That's actually possible within philosophy. That's the end point of philosophy, when you do that with your own understanding of existence. So there is such a point to reach. The reaching of this point leads to the following things. It's not just a scientific sort of understanding. It's way more profound than that. What happens is that you reach something called awakening. Awakening with a capital A. You reach absolute truth. Truth with a capital T. You reach what I call God realization. You reach infinity. You reach love. You reach omniscience. You reach infinite consciousness. You reach immortality. You reach absolute perfection, good, and total clarity. What I'm literally telling you is that if you do philosophy correctly, you will become immortal. You will become so conscious, you will disentangle your mind so completely that you will transcend the possibility of physical death, because you will deconstruct the very notion of physicality, which turns out to be a construct of your mind. I've done this. A few other people on the planet have done this. It's possible to do this, but it's not easy to do this, because everything in your mind is designed to keep you from realizing this truth. This is not a theoretical, abstract realization or truth, like some theory of general relativity. This is a live, palpable, life-transforming event that will change your entire attitude towards life, reality, and other people. And it will be the happiest day of your life. So that is possible. These are the stakes. This is real. This is not theory. Also, one point I should mention is that philosophy, beyond just that, if that wasn't enough, is also about the cultivation of your mind and your intellect. See, the mind and intelligence itself, these are beautiful things. Our culture doesn't appreciate the beauty of the mind, the beauty of intellect. And mind and intellect are so deep, they can be cultivated so deeply. There's almost no end to which you could cultivate your mind and your intellect. Most people's minds and intellects are completely underdeveloped. And one of the greatest joys that I get, beyond the awakening and the immortality, one of the greatest joys that I get, the fruits of all this work that I've done for decades, is that I'm in love with my own mind and my own intelligence. I've cultivated it for 3 decades to the point where my mind is like this beautiful, exotic, alien flower growing in some garden, perfectly manicured and like, it's just a beautiful thing to look at. And I'm not saying that to brag or in some sort of narcissistic way. It's just that, like, I myself am in awe at the intellect that I've been able to cultivate after 3 decades of near daily cultivation. It's incredible. I would have never have thought this was possible. I sort of just kind of stumbled into it by accident. But I'm telling you this so that you can do it deliberately. See, now you have no excuses. You don't need to do it by accident. You can cultivate it deliberately. I get so much joy from that. Most of my joy in life comes from just dwelling within my own intellect. It's better than sex. It's better than making money. I've had plenty of great sex. I've made millions of dollars. None of that compares to the joy I get from simply basking in my own intellect. And that had to be cultivated. Okay, now I'm going to tell you which philosophies are utterly a waste of your time, meaning they're utterly wrong. Dualism, atheism, behaviorism, materialism, physicalism, realism, scientific materialism, logical positivism, empiricism, rationalism, libertarianism, nihilism, absurdism, existentialism, and reductionism. It's a big list. It's also going to be very controversial. A lot of people will debate me on this. I'm not saying absolutely everything is wrong. It's hard to find a philosophy or worldview where like literally everything about it is wrong. That's pretty rare. But for the most part, these are wrong. They're wrong in very fundamental ways, is what I mean. And then maybe they're right in minor ways. Now the question of should you become a professional philosopher, professor, or academic? I recommend you don't go into the university system. You're not going to find truth in a university. That's not what the university is designed for. The university is designed for the survival of the university. So if you love philosophy, don't become an academic philosopher. However, if you want to develop a career of being a philosopher, you can outside the university system like I have. It won't be easy. There's quite few slots available. You know, everyone can't become a career philosopher, but some of you can. In order to do so, you're going to have to offer something unique, something new to the field. You can't just regurgitate what everybody else has said or what I have said. You have to offer, new insights. You earn philosophy as a philosopher, generating new insights. But, there's so much to consciousness, and there's so much to spirituality, and there's so much to philosophy that there's certainly opportunities out there for you if you're endeavoring enough. It's not going to be easy, but then again, no career and no business is easy. All of them are very competitive for the most part. Are you too young to start doing philosophy? Some people have asked me this question via email and comment and private message. I don't think there's such a thing. Really, I started questioning reality when I was a kid, and certainly by my teenage years. So the problem is not that you're too young. The problem is probably that you're already too old, too late. Now, there's no such thing as too old, but I mean, like, you're already behind the curve. If you're 15 years old, you should have already been doing this for the last 5 years. You missed 5 years. You see? So go ahead and get started. If you're wondering, well, Leo, am I too old for philosophy? What if I'm 60 years old? In a certain sense, the older you get, the more important philosophy gets because, as you get older, you have less gains you can have from sex and from materialistic pursuits, from money, from career. So, as you approach your mortality and your death, you're going to have to face some deep challenging questions about existence. And you have more free time probably if you're older, if you're near retirement age. What else you got to do? What else are you going to do with your life? You're going to go chase girls? You're going to go chase money? You're going to go chase fame? Probably not. At your age, philosophy might be one of the most worthwhile things you can do. And eventually, what you want to get to is you want to, don't waste time, get real serious about it, get very straightforward about it, cut all the shit, and eventually, you want to transcend your own death. That's the point. And yes, you can do that. What are the downsides of doing philosophy? The downsides are that you can turn philosophy into a farce where it just becomes like an echo chamber. Your mind becomes this massive echo chamber, and you just, you feed all of your own ideas back to yourself and reinforce them. And you construct some kind of ideology, and you become some sort of ideological cult leader. Or you just get so deluded by your philosophy that you think you have the truth, that you know what the truth is, but actually you haven't awoken. And you can waste a lot of time doing that. You can waste a lot of time reading Kant and Hegel and Descartes and arguing and debating and then doing this online. You can start a YouTube channel where you debate and debunk people and you shit on atheists or you shit on theists and then you shit on Marxists and capitalists and whatever. You can do all that. And this is just, this would be very counterproductive. And then beyond just you doing that, you're going to suck other people into your own toxic ideology. So be careful with that. And also you can neglect the survival aspects of your life. Relationships, sex, business, art, more practical stuff, family life. Okay, here's a quick list for how to get started with philosophy. Number 1, briefly study all the different philosophies that exist, just in summary, so you understand what's out there. Number 2, decide what kind of questions you're most interested in answering. Make a list. Number 3, start independent contemplation. Don't read, sit down and actually contemplate. Number 4, observe your own mind at work and make observations and write down new insights about how your own mind is working. Number 5, be ruthlessly honest with yourself, your own biases, and your own deceptions. That's it. You can get started on philosophy today. Today is the best time to start. Pick one question that fascinates you the most out of all the ones that I've talked about. Sit down on a couch, set a timer for an hour or two, and just contemplate. And have maybe a notebook with you so you can write down some notes. But look, even taking notes can be a distraction. Pure philosophy is not even you taking notes. Pure philosophy is you just sitting there with your eyes closed, contemplating some deep question. And then if an insight arises, you write it down and then you go back into your contemplation. It's not just mindless writing. Mindless writing is not proper contemplation. You contemplate, then you jot down the fruits of your contemplation. Then you stop writing and you contemplate again, right? So really judge yourself by the amount of time you spend focused in contemplation. I recommend you start today. Lastly, I'll say that philosophy requires integrity and embodiment. It's not just enough to know a bunch of theory or facts or philosophies. It's not enough to recite the things that I've told you. Philosophy must transform you. I'm talking about doing philosophy at such a deep level that you cease to be human. Philosophy so deep that you transcend death. That's true philosophy. That's serious philosophy as opposed to all other kinds. I want to recommend for you a couple more episodes if you enjoyed this one. A very important one and relevant one to you will be the episode called How to Discover What's True, where I guide you through an inquiry process. Make sure you watch that one. Also, see my series called Deconstructing the Myth of Science, Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3. This is some of the most serious philosophical work that I've published. It's extremely profound. It took me decades to achieve the insights that are present in that series. It's really a historical work of philosophy. It's for free. You can find it on YouTube. Watch that. That shows you the depth of philosophy that I do and also the depth of philosophy that you can do. It'll also help you a lot to deconstruct many of the myths of this, science that have been programmed into your mind. Help you break free of those. And then lastly, I'm working on a new episode that's going to be talking about this concept called bootstrapping. So remember this word, bootstrapping, because in the next few months, I'm going to publish my bootstrapping episode, which is going to be very relevant and sort of continue on and talk about, fundamental aspects of philosophy and epistemology that you will be interested in here. All right, that's it. I'm done here. This was a long one, a lot of material here, but this is like my favorite topic. So I had to make it juicy. Come check out my website down below. You'll find resources for philosophers there. You'll find my blog, which has tons of various philosophical insights and resources that I share almost on a daily basis these days. I put so much effort into my blog. You'd be a fool not to look at it. It's all free. You can find my book reviews on my website. You can find the Life Purpose course. I'm going to have future courses coming out soon. I'm working on some profound courses that will be coming out in the next year. Subscribe to the newsletter. Stay tuned for those. Those will be through the website. Come check out Actualized.org, the forum. On the forum, you can find like-minded people to have philosophical conversations with. You can support me at patreon.com/actualized with donations. I thank you for those. Helps me to stay independent and uncorrupted by various kinds of corporate and academic forces. And the last thing I'll say is this. Again, I'm biased, but I think that Actualized.org is the deepest source of philosophy you'll ever find on this planet. At this time. Maybe in the future there'll be something better, but for now, I don't think there's anything deeper than what I've created. That was my goal from the outset. Hopefully you can appreciate that. The majority of people who stumble upon Actualized.org will not appreciate that because they're just stumbling around on the internet. They're not serious philosophers. Hopefully a handful of you will understand what's here, the value that is here. You have to work this value. You were lucky to find Actualized.org, but that doesn't mean you're done. This is just the beginning. Now you have to actually work it. Work the things I talk about. Make it practical. Work it for a few decades, and you'll see the amazing results you can get and how profound this work is. You won't even appreciate the depth of my work until 10 years afterwards, 10 years after doing it. Then you'll start to understand. And my work is just getting started, really. I'm working on a new course, a couple of new courses. I'm working on a new book, really a book which I intend to transform the world. It's going to be one of the most important works of philosophy in the last 1,000 years will be my book. I've been working on it for years now. It's still going to take years to finish, maybe 5 years from now, maybe 10 years from now. I don't know. I have no time frame on it. My goal is simply to create the most powerful work of philosophy that mankind has ever written. That's my work with my goal with the book. If I can't do that, I won't even publish a book. I'm not interested in just publishing some short, fluffy self-help book. This is going to be the deepest philosophy that there is. And in my future upcoming course, I'm going to be teaching some extremely advanced spiritual stuff that is beyond anything that any spiritual teacher has ever taught you. I'm going to talk about how to reach not just awakening and not just God realization. I'm going to introduce to you a whole new class of awakening that I've discovered, which is awakening to alien intelligence. That's going to be very unique as a teaching. I have not seen anybody teaching this. I'm not talking about contacting aliens. I'm talking about jailbreaking your mind so profoundly that your own mind accesses alien consciousness. So imagine for a second that one day mankind will come into contact with advanced alien civilizations. Imagine how much more advanced those aliens will be in their consciousness than a human. It'll be like the difference between a mouse and a human will be the difference between a human and one of these aliens. But now imagine that you could access that alien mind now. Your own mind can turn into that alien mind. Imagine that. That's even more amazing than talking to an alien. I mean, actually becoming that alien, experiencing its mind and its consciousness. How is that possible? Well, that's what my course will help to explain. That's the level that I've reached personally in my own work. it's way beyond awakening. I've gone way beyond any kind of normal awakening or enlightenment. I mean, this is insane stuff that nobody else is going to teach you. So I'm super excited for that. I'm still researching this. I'm in the early phases of developing this course, but if you want to go the deepest with me, those of you who want to go the deepest with me, this is what you're in for. This is what you're going to stick around for. This is what's going to really blow your mind. So stay tuned. That will come.